Hello. See, where was I? Yay. Yay. That works. Nope. Yep. There we go. Let's see. I want to see something actually. Uh, Alright, so there's that. And I think that does that. Yep, there we go. Do. Let's see, where was I? And this one, I need it to be. There we go. Yay. Yep, there we go. Alright, now where were we? We were left on. Let's see. Do you all want to continue 8 ball or a Warhammer? I really like this YouTuber. It's called the Exploring Series. He just does audiobooks. Let's finish. Let's do 8 ball. Do 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 do.
Introducing Milo's Rewards.
Jeez. Why is everything messed up?
Retrieving these truths from the space beyond spaces to when they were blasted, perhaps we might prevent ourselves from becoming subjects of the same most physically strenuous field of study. The drone then ceases to whir and falls gently to the dusty floor as the hologram disappears. Sokolsky approaches her and asks where the assassin was headed after the gates. Monsieur turns to face him without making eye contact and replies, "The Temple of Octo, where the paths of all her friends not coincidentally
Dropping
converged
frames.
once their
Why?
less occluded tasks were done." When they first discovered their total expunction from the Hellenistic chronicles, they assumed it was an act of revenge for their part in the city's fall. It turns out that it was just one long, complex distraction to cover up a simple act of theft from the temple's reliquary.
Oh, here we go.
Sokolsky nods and says that there's no points for guessing what they stole then. Monsieur shakes her head and says that there's never any points for guessing, so she'll let him explain what he's doing here, doubling the population of vanished Teresios. Sokolsky replies that he's here to heist her, causing her to laugh, and says that it's not a very challenging heist, as she has no guards or countermeasures. Sokolsky waves at the ruins and says, "No, nothing. All by her lonesome in the lostest of lost cities. Someone thinks she's much too valuable to expose to anything weird." He nudges the drone with his foot and asks if she ever tried cracking a safe. She muses that From a certain point of view, that's all she ever does. She assumes that there's something very valuable in the safe he has in mind. Sokolsky replies that she knows there is, as that was no coincidental lecture she was just delivering. Monsieur giggles and says that he can hardly blame her for indulging in some theater, given the venue. She sighs and says that this is going to be good, as she's waited a long time. Sokolsky raises an eyebrow, asking if she means for someone to steal the 8-ball, but she clarifies that she means for a chance to get her hands on it.
Alright.
She's never been allowed, and Sokolsky tells her that she might still not be allowed. They're stealing it back, not manhandling it or asking it 20 questions. She simply replies that at least they'll have proof it exists, and seeing is believing. Sokolsky raises an eyebrow at her, but if she has any way of knowing, she doesn't react. Back in Site 15, as Cimmerian is walking across the site campus and glaring at his phone, he mutters in anger about someone not answering their phone as he's suddenly approached by Sokolsky. Sokolsky just hands him plane tickets without explanation, telling him that he's got an hour to grab his bag and the load. When asked if he understands what he means by the load, Cimmerian guesses he means Hishikaku, to which Sokolsky snaps his fingers and points in affirmation. Cimmerian asks where they're going, and Sokolsky just replies with, racking the balls, maybe breaking a few on the way. The next bit of footage is from Sloth's Pit, Wisconsin, as a man in sunglasses is sitting at a picnic table outside of an ice cream shop, eating a vanilla ice cream cone, as Sokolsky sits down across from him. He thanks him for agreeing to meet, to which the man, Dr. Placeholder McDoctorate, retorts that they're the disaster response people, so they don't call unless someone screwed up large. He didn't really have much choice, but Sokolsky says that still, he picked a nice rendezvous spot, a place in the sun. Placeholder scowls and reaches out to shake the table's umbrella for emphasis, saying that it's just a coincidence. Sokolsky nods and says that it's a metaphor for Schadenfreude then, as he'll mock him for whatever went wrong, throwing shade.
Where was I?
Placeholder just rolls his eyes and says that this isn't a high school English class, asking him what he wants.
E-armor 2
Sokolsky tells him that he's putting a big thing together, a world-ending threat response, and since Placeholder ends up stuck in the middle of those half the time, he thought they'd skip the middle step. He then glances up at the restaurant's signage, mentioning that it's called Rocky's Road, and asks if it's a reference to the hero's journey. Placeholder just shrugs, saying that it's an obvious ice cream pun, and he doesn't own the shop. He asks what the big thing is about, and Sokolsky tells him that they're pulling a heist. Placeholder immediately becomes interested, not noticing a scoop of his ice cream falling off, and says that he loves heists. He's always wanted to heist something, and he could talk about heists all day long. Sokolsky just points down at the fallen scoop and asks if the vanilla is a sly reference to his state of perpetual non-protagonism. Placeholder waves the question off, just saying that he likes vanilla, and asks what part he'll get to play, hoping that he's the face, the one responsible for doing most of the talking and social interactions. Sokolsky agrees that he's the face, but considering the nature of the job, the site, and the crew, he's also hoping to lean a bit on his narrativistic crap wherever possible. He then pauses and remarks that this shop is on Frost Street, a self-fulfilling ice cream reference. Placeholder snaps back that it's a Twin Peaks reference and tells him to leave the tropes to the experts. He asks who they are heisting from, to which Sokolsky says, the Wanderer's Library, remarking that Placeholder has been there before. Placeholder shudders and says that he saw brain spiders on fire off the shoulder of a giant red millipede.
Gross.
Before he can continue, Sokolsky cuts him off, saying to not have any copyright infringement here. Placeholder then asks what the target is, and Sokolsky just counts on his fingers up to 8 and then balls them up into fists with a faint pop. Placeholder immediately stands up, knocking the umbrella aside, and starts yelling about Hishikaku, asking what he did to his site and the hex field. Sokolsky looks up at him curiously, asking what he means by his site, and Placeholder just snorts, saying that he wasn't always the hero's journey guy, he has layers. Sokolsky asks if that's a Neapolitan reference, but Placeholder ignores him, turning to the street,
Track.
and says that he's in. Sokolsky stands, but instead heads for the ice cream shop, saying that they're ahead of schedule and he's almost never in Wisconsin. It would be bad luck not to grab a few scoops of Blue Moon. As an aside, since this is perhaps the only time I'll ever get to mention Blue Moon, I'll just say that it is the best ice cream flavor, and Sokolsky is absolutely correct. In Site 43, Sokolsky has called a meeting of all the section heads here, and the chairs and chief's boardroom is filled with experts in a variety of anomalous fields, and several individuals who are themselves anomalous. Among them are Dr. Lillian Lilyhammer, a medicist with an eidetic memory, Dr. Udo Okori, Mycomantic thaumaturge, Dr. Jinyi Du, quantum supermechanist, Dr. Trevor Bremmel, anomalous weapons engineer, Dr. Ilsa Reinders, immortal esoteric polymath, and Chief Delfina Ibanez, hyper-competent Mobile Task Force's commander. They all await Sokolsky's arrival. Sokolsky is standing at the topside egress point for Site 43's main elevator, and when it opens, Dr. William Weddle bursts out, falling to the ground in surprise. Sokolsky helps him up and asks if he ran that replication study for him. Weddle dusts himself off and shakes Sokolsky's hand away, swearing and asking why he's here before saying that it's just his luck. Sokolsky laughs and says that Weddle heard he was holding a meeting and he was trying to run away from it, but he should have known better. Weddle replies that the effect doesn't work if he knows better, referring to SCP-7000, which makes him a living bad luck sink. He asks Sokolsky why he's up here, as he thought he lived on site. Sokolsky explains that he's jet-setting, as he's got places to go and people to commandeer. Speaking of which, he asks if Weddle has any time to spare today, causing Weddle to recoil against the elevator door and say that he and Etra nearly ruined his life once already. Sokolsky replies that that would be kind of like ruining the Last Supper. His life has other people's graffiti all over it. He tells him that this way he's already almost out the door, so that's a bonus. If it helps, considering the pickings on offer downstairs, Weddle is obviously not going to be doing anything important for him, but asks again if he ran that replication study. Weddle retrieves his datapad from his lab coat pocket and drops it, although Sokolsky catches it and scrolls to the relevant file. The file is about a pocket billiards table and was tested by Weddle and Dr. Bastien LeBlanc. They attempted to play a regular game of straight pool, with Weddle first attempting 10 break shots, each resulting in a foul or illegal break. LeBlanc breaks for the remainder of the experiment. On his turn in each of the subsequent 19 games, Weddle calls shots on a variety of solid or striped balls as opportunities present themselves, but each game sees his luck progressively worsen, while LeBlanc's improves in equal proportion. Each game ends when Weddle accidentally prematurely pockets the 8-ball. By the 19th game, Weddle has called every number at least once, save for 13, and on this game he illegally calls the cue ball, which he does pocket, but also pockets the 8-ball again an instant later. LeBlanc successfully pockets all 16 balls with a single break on the 20th game, the 8-ball pocketed last, then retrieves and racks the balls again. Weddle refuses to continue, so LeBlanc separates the 13-ball from the set and suggests Weddle call it in a single shot. Weddle reluctantly complies, but the resultant shot misses the 13-ball, breaks the racked set, and pockets the 8-ball. He claims victory, but subsequent analysis shows that in his surprise, Weddle failed to remove his cue from the table, altering the paths of several balls, and so pocketing the 8-ball whilst simultaneously fouling is an automatic loss. LeBlanc subsequently reported correctly answering every question on that evening's episode of Jeopardy! Weddle attempts to grab the tablet back from Sokolsky, but it flings out against the elevator doors, and he makes no motion to pick it up. He tells Sokolsky that this is where he says that there's nothing anomalous about the pool table, and Sokolsky agrees, saying that that was all Weddle. They did get a free pool table out of it, though. Weddle argues that he can't play, but Sokolsky just claps him on the back, causing his glasses to fall off, although Sokolsky catches them. He tells him that maybe he just hasn't found the right game. He then calls for the elevator and says that he's off to see the wizards, but he asks Weddle to do him that favor and pick someone up for him, as he's got bigger fish to fry. In the interior of his Wrigley Longship's sacred monitoring room in Site 211, researcher James A. Harkness is sitting asleep with his feet up on his desk. What appears to be a scrapbook sits on his lap, and no other personnel are present. A sound from off-camera wakes him, and he shudders, glancing down at the book and yawning. He then looks at his monitor, rolling his eyes and softly singing himself a song to the tune of Taps, with lyrics related to him not caring about a fish. He opens the scrapbook again, but its contents are obscured by the camera's security filters. There's a loud crashing sound off-camera, and Harkness spins in his chair, standing and yelling, "Who goes there?" A voice swears, followed by more clattering sounds and another swear, and as Harkness turns on the lights, Dr. Weddle stumbles into view, with a greenish substance coating his beard. He wipes it off onto the carpet, with it having the consistency of tartar sauce, and he asks what happened in here. Harkness sighs and explains that it's a fish cult, pointing to a whiteboard featuring an array of nautical scribbles and sketches. One phrase is written in bold black marker, circled and underlined many times, continuing onto the wall and across the entire room, reading, "So long and thanks for all the fish, and all the fish, and all the fish." Harkness continues his explanation, saying it's SCP-5320, a big dumb fish, and it makes everyone who looks at it too long get a bit rapture of the deep about it. The first week at work, they make fish jokes at each other every couple hours, but months later, they're starting fish rituals. A month after that, they're spending most of every shift propitiating the fish gods, so they've got a rotation going now, where they all get sent on vacation before they get too squirrely, and they leave him to mind the shop. Weddle asks if he's not affected by it, but Harkness says, other than pissing him off, not really. He then yells at Weddle as he looks at the book on the floor, but as Weddle does so, his glasses fall off. He catches them and puts them back on, but they fall off again, and then Harkness tackles him into the whiteboard, yelling that that book is a memetic kill agent sampler. Weddle picks up his glasses and asks if he's doing a little light reading, but Harkness says that that's why he's here, as he's got the highest cognitive resistance value of anyone he's ever met. He's basically immune to kill agents, so fish agents don't even have a chance, and the stuff in this book just gives him bad gas.
Fish agents.
He's testing out the newest batch as a side gig while he waits for the pool piss to filter out of everyone's brains. Weddle blinks rapidly as he attempts to follow the logic and metaphors, and is reminded of Poole, telling Harkness that that's why he's here, because Etra wants him. Harkness narrows his eyes, saying that that can't be right, suggesting maybe it's Reza or AIAD that's interested in him, as he's usually given really crummy jobs due to his CRV value. Weddle confirms that it's definitely Etra, and although Harkness remarks that it's a bit more prestigious than his usual, Weddle tells him that last year they got him kicked into a barbecue by a kangaroo. Harkness nods and says that he'll steal a pair of waders from the locker room just in case. In a club in London, Dr. Sokolsky steps in as the music blares around him. A high, keening wail interspersed with polyphonic madrigals celebrating and or lamenting the demise of the hanged king of Alagada.
Why is it taking so long?
Human, demi-human, and humanoid subjects are dancing, drinking, or engaging in a variety of mating rituals beneath dim and flickering incandescent lights. A pair of golem bouncers lead Sokolsky to a back room, where he finds a demon sitting at an expensive-looking oak table with a briefcase in front of him and a smile on his face. His voice booms as he welcomes Sokolsky, asking if he can get him anything to drink, suggesting that the unpasteurized milk toddy strikes a compelling balance between soporific and gut-wrenching. The escorts depart, and Sokolsky sits down, stating that that's probably meant to be very kind of him to ask, but he declines, as they probably should get down to business. The demon, Razum Kal, claps his hands together and says that, of course, as Sokolsky has a game to win, and probably more than one if he knows his reputation. Sokolsky removes an envelope from his jacket and says that this is their side of the bargain, the agreement, and he'll find everything is in order from all 13 overseers. The demon nods and mentions the administrator as well, but Sokolsky just replies that there is no such thing. The demon states that he still signed it, to which Sokolsky says that he can't say as he hasn't looked at it. Razum Kal takes the envelope and examines it, remarking on the unbroken seal and stating that Sokolsky was very careful when he didn't look. He then nudges the briefcase towards the doctor, asking if he wants to examine the merchandise. Sokolsky just shakes his head and says that he trusts him. But after a pause, both of them burst into laughter as Sokolsky opens the briefcase. His face is briefly lit up by what's inside, and he nods, asking if it's been properly laundered. Razum Kal says, of course, with unstained denominations, genuine human souls in return for his artificial ones, at an almost favorable exchange rate. He asks where they got the originals, as he didn't even know soul NFTs existed, and that's kind of his domain. Sokolsky just says that the most he can tell him is that they don't exist in this universe, or he guesses that they didn't, but they do now, thanks to them. He asks if Razum Kal has scored them a spot on the invite list, which the demon confirms, although obviously the matter of fake IDs will be their concern. He might have left their circles for his present employment long ago, but his old contacts with corporate are still solid. He does mention that hell's a bit on edge at the best of times, but this is different. They really want the night to go off without a hitch, with egos on the line, potential for hurt feelings, millennia in the sloughing pits, that sort of thing. Sokolsky replies that that's really going to suck for them then, and asks if Razum Kal will get in too much trouble when it all goes south. The demon shrugs and says that business is business.
File is not slicing.
He threw in his lot with the company, and if he has to burn a few bridges to do right by his present benefactors, then, well, burning is one of his specialties, right under market research. Sokolsky tells him that he's glad he thinks this is a worthwhile investment, as he's paying through the nose for this honor. Razum Kal, however, says that they gouged them, actually, as privileged access to the 8-ball is a priceless boon, and they were prepared to pay 3 times as much, or, alternatively, steal it from them themselves. Sokolsky grins in return and says that obviously he's joking, and would never consider such a thing, to which the demon agrees, and they both laugh again, but somewhat forced this time. The demon continues by saying that whatever else they might be, they are business people first and foremost. Marshall, Carter, and Dark always honor their commitments, which is a trait he thinks that they share with their misplaced object. Sokolsky thumps the table once and says that he definitely believes the demon is not going to try and screw him over now, asking for the other half of the payment. The bouncers proceed to lead Sokolsky through a service door and down a flight of stairs to where the club's risque clientele and
Try and get this
expensive
thing to
decor
repair.
give way to an unoccupied series of brushed concrete passages. They open a door via a two-factor keycard lock, and Sokolsky enters, finding a
Treatment,
young
select
woman
big
in
printer.
fashionable magician garb crouching on a table with a disproportionately large grimoire splayed over her knees. She
Try this
slams
again.
it shut, causing a cloud of rainbow dust to cover her face and hair as she hops off the table and greets Sokolsky, calling him a jailer, the Serpent's Hand term for Foundation members. She introduces herself cheerfully as Agent S and asks if he's ready to play. Sokolsky regards her with bemusement as he looks around the
Excuse me.
room, finding it covered in various unidentifiable occult paraphernalia, and asks what game they're playing. She smiles in response and twirls, stating that it's the best game, the only game, and it's going to be so much fun. She grabs his hand and pulls him deeper into the room, as Sokolsky asks if she knows that this is serious business. She pats him twice on the cheek and puts her hat on his bald head, calling him cute and saying that they'll check out some of her coolest tricks first. Sokolsky says that he was hoping she might be able to help him out with something first, and he pulls out the IntelliWard used by the thieves. Agent S interrupts him, asking how a jailer got a Serpent's Hand IntelliWard, to which Sokolsky replies that he guesses that answers that question, and puts it away. Agent S begins rifling through nearby objects until she finds something she likes, calling them earbuds. She grabs an orange carnation out of a vase and puts it into Sokolsky's breast pocket, then grabs another and speaks into it. From Sokolsky's reaction, it's apparent that he received the message telepathically, calling them floral walkie-talkies. Agent S laughs and moves on to another object, a silver padlock in the shape of a stylized human heart. She calls this one the monolock, mentioning how it's like in tabletop RPGs, where talking is a free action. This is like that in real life, allowing a person to make one dramatic speech, uninterrupted, on any subject you feel sufficiently passionate about, and everyone around you has to let you finish without lifting a hand against you. Sokolsky just replies that she really likes puns, but she grins and says that that's actually a portmanteau. He says that he would have called it the filibuster, but she replies that that's actually something different, attempting to find it for a moment before giving up. She explains that it adds real percussive force to any dialectical bombshell you drop. They're not giving him access to anything weapons grade, though, as it's a library after all, and one that really cancels your card if you kick up too much of a fuss. Sokolsky notes that it's quite the armory, though, and she could probably give MC&D a run for their blood money with all this, if she took a notion. She raises an eyebrow in response, considering him seriously for an instant before deliberately laughing it off. If she took a notion, she could take the company without lifting a finger. All of this is just her hobby. Whatever it is he's planning, she could make it happen with nothing but her sweet smile, a kind word, and something she'd rather not say. She swore off the easy way a long time ago, though, and it's no fun anyways. Her smile falters, and she remarks that she's got a lot of fun to catch up on. Sokolsky asks if she's not happy with MC&D, as he's sure that they could find a place for someone with her talents at the Foundation. She suddenly snaps in response, telling him that she's sure she could find room up his ass to stuff his own head if he tries. With that, the conversation closes. Now Sokolsky's team is entirely assembled, and the 7 of them meet in Area 09, the ETRA headquarters located in Nevada. Dr. McDoctorate, Director Hishikaku, Researcher
Dr.
Harkness,
McDoctorate.
Dr. Monsieur, Dr. Sumerian, Dr. Weddle, and Agent S all gather in front of Dr. Sokolsky, with a projection of SCP-8888 on the wall behind him. Sokolsky welcomes them all and says that they all know his name and they all know why they're here, because he wanted them to be, so that they can do what he tells them, and they can get what he wants, which is SCP-8888. McDoctorate corrects him to mean that this is what the Foundation wants, because this is the single most important piece of containment equipment in existence. Sokolsky replies that the best indication of what he means is what he says, and asks for a show of hands of who knows what SCP-8888 is. Hishikaku, McDoctorate, and Monsieur raise their hands, to which Sokolsky says is good, as he really didn't want to have to shoot anyone. He emphasizes that if any of them ever tell anyone what he's about to tell them, they will be shot. But luckily they don't have to worry about that, as he knows for a fact that they're all rock solid. Harkness asks why he said it if they don't have to worry about it, and Sokolsky tells him that he wants them to be worried in general. Sumerian remarks that he's going to start writing him up right now, but Sokolsky continues, stating that this device, the 8-ball, is worth more than all their lives put together, and maybe as much as his. He says that he won't bore them with the technical specifications, despite Hishikaku and McDoctorate objecting, and Weddle chimes in, with Sumerian asking him how he ended up here anyway. Weddle replies that he just kinda got swept along, and he glances around the room, asking Sokolsky who exactly he was picking up at the meeting at Site-43. Sumerian yells that he didn't pick up anybody, and he made him go to that meeting, where no one knew who he was. Sokolsky moves on, stating that they are gathered here today to plan a daring heist to steal back the 8-ball, which has been stolen by parties unknown thanks to the stunning leadership and impeccable preparation of director Hishikaku, calling for a round of applause. Hishikaku swears at him, as Agent S asks why he's here if it's his fault, but Monsieur says that he will be useful. Hishikaku, in turn, asks why the Skip is here, SCP-7000, although Sumerian tells him that he can just use their names, as Skip is an unprofessional and unethical pejorative. Sokolsky explains that Weddle is here for the opposite reason that Hishikaku gets to tag along, because he will be useless, which will be useful for his master plan to retrieve their stolen artifact from the bowels of the Wanderer's library. After a pause, McDoctorate says that he thought they were going there just as more of a waypoint, but Sokolsky confirms that they stole it, and that's where it is. Hishikaku remarks that he had already figured this out, with Sokolsky implying that he had inside information, and Harkness says he pictured himself more sitting on top of an elevator, cracking codes on a laptop or something. McDoctorate notes the nice Mission Impossible reference, but says that he gets squashed when the elevator goes up real fast though. Harkness asks to confirm that this is one of those teams full of people with special abilities, with Sokolsky saying that sure it is, with most of the ability concentrated at the top. Harkness wants to know if he's just there because of his thick skull, but Sokolsky says that they already established that as Weddle's role, and tells him that he selected him for a whole range of his abilities, which goes for all of them. McDoctorate brings a vast knowledge of pataphysics, which is good because none of the rest of them can stand it, and since he's got the best social skills in the room, as terrifying as that sounds, he'll be the point man for handling the human element as well. Weddle compares him to Paul Newman in The Sting, which McDoctorate says is not a heist, leading to a short discussion about the film. Sokolsky thanks them for their input, before continuing to say that Agent S will be supplying them with a range of magical equipment that the library's security will never detect. Dr. Monsier's expertise in historioglyphics will be vital for both locating and unlocking the vault where the 8-ball is being held. Dr. Sumerian will be responsible for doing super important secret things he won't tell any of them about ahead of time, because that's a must for this sort of thing, although Sumerian asks if he'll at least tell him. Sokolsky replies that the odds for that are about even, and then asks if he forgot anyone. Hishikaku mentions himself, to which Sokolsky just says, "Excellent," and moves on to code names, stating that he shouldn't have to tell them what the theme will be. Harkness asks why there needs to be a theme, and McDoctorate just says because of pataphysics, but asks why it has to be this theme. The theme, of course, is pool, and he says that they're stripes. Monsieur will be 9-ball, Sumerian is 10-ball, Hishikaku is 11-ball, McDoctorate is 12-ball, but he then checks his notes and glances at Weddle, saying that he forgot that they added the second idiot. He then apologizes, saying that he had to reshuffle some things. So Weddle is 13-ball, Harkness is 14-ball, and Agent S is 15-ball.
Well,
1 through 7 are the opposing force, which he'll brief them all on shortly, and their outside context problem, who really needs to stay outside the context because he will mess things up quite a bit if it gets involved, is the 8th archivist of the Wanderer's Library. McDoctorate explains that he mind controlled him once, as he can mind control people, and he's also a really big bug. Sokolsky says that he's a big, red, ball-headed bug, so he's red ball, as in billiards, as in keep him out of their play area, please. Harkness asks what that leaves for Sokolsky, as that's all the balls. Sokolsky dramatically grins and lowers his head, telling them to call him Cue-ball. Weddle points at him and turns to look at the other group members, saying that that's why they're doing this entire thing. It was all for that. McDoctorate agrees, but Sokolsky says it's because 10-ball can't pronounce 11-ball's name, leading Sumerian to butcher the pronunciation of Hishikaku's name. McDoctorate really wants to know what Hishikaku's role is going to be, to which Sokolsky explains that 11-ball will be gaining them access to the library, and once there, they're going to need to blend into the crowd. That means fancy dress attire for everybody, real expensive stuff. But they'll just take it out of their pay and they can bug admin for vouchers afterwards. Weddle remarks that he doesn't think he gets paid anymore, and Hishikaku asks if he's missing something, bringing fancy dress to the library. Sokolsky tells him that he's missing many things, but in this case, he was meant to. It's not a dramatic reveal without some buildup. They'll all be dressed to the nines on their mission to recover the 8-ball, because tomorrow night, they crash Casino Night at the Wanderer's Library in collaboration with the sovereign Tartarian territory of Under Vegas. He clicks to the next slide, revealing a heavily stylized poster, which mentions how you can win big. There's raffles, a bingo parlor, and a punch and ice cream social. It's located at the Wanderer's Library, taking place at the Tolling of the 4th Tower of Suffering, and the dress code is physiologically appropriate formal attire. It's also sponsored by Infernal Under Vegas Casino Spa and Resort, MC&D, McSalty's Seafood Shed and Irish Pub, and the Mana Charitable Foundation. The group pauses, and Sokolsky quips for not everyone to clap at once, at which point Sumerian says that his big plan to steal the 8-ball back is to make them dodge 2 hostile groups of interest. Sokolsky replies that the demons aren't hostile, despite how that sounds, with Agent S remarking that her boss got her free tickets to the red carpet premiere of Hocus Pocus 2, and also made them have a red carpet premiere. Sokolsky begins to explain what the real problem will be, but McDoctorate cuts him off, saying that this is how you explain a plan that's going to fail. Sokolsky agrees, and Hishikaku asks how he explains a plan that's going to succeed. Sokolsky reaches down and taps a key, saying, "like this," as the recording terminates. The next thing we're given is a transcript of some enigmatic footage, with the context being unknown. The camera location is an extremely dark cave, the stone only made visible by a sliver of light from above. A coded message in decimal reads, "The quick brown fox jumps over 13 lazy dogs." The light flickers and the dislodging of rubble is faintly audible before it begins visibly trickling into the cavern. Multiple shrouded figures appear silhouetted against the light, with elements of their bodies refracting it where it falls. They cluster around the camera, whispering excitedly to one another in a pidgin of classical Greek and Demotic. Several recorded statements are of particular note, translated to be them commenting on something that is very new, newer than now, and also very, very old. They say that it looks so lonely, but will never be alone again. The final statement is then spoken by a hunched figure whose body is almost entirely reflective, reaching forward to presumably touch the source of the footage, and they say that it will change everything. With that, we're introduced to Operation Pickpocket, and are provided the interviews and after-action reports in a somewhat disjointed manner. The first bit of text is from Sokolsky, just asking what you think happened. Then we're given a document explaining that Class C personnel/infotech researcher James Harkness was recovered 3 days after the communications breakdown between members of Sokolsky's Provisional Task Force. His station was found abandoned, and Harkness was disoriented and uncooperative with asset recovery personnel, necessitating sedation before being brought to Site 15 for questioning. The recording captures a dark space featuring a door and a small metal table. Indistinct sounds of commotion are heard in the distance, and the door swings open as Dr. Sokolsky enters, propping the door open with a wedge. He then disappears briefly before 2 security guards enter, dragging the limp form of Harkness behind them, flanked by an orderly writing on a clipboard. The guards toss Harkness into the seat across from Sokolsky and leave, with the orderly handing over his clipboard and pen to Sokolsky, who fills out the documents.
Dang it,
Harkness's bloodshot eyes then widen as he recognizes Sokolsky, and his speech is slurred as he yells that he wants his phone call. Sokolsky is surprised that he's not coherent by now and looks at the clipboard, shocked at how high the dosage was. He says that he's no use to him like this, and hands the clipboard back to the orderly, who turns and leaves the room. Harkness glances around the room and asks where he is, but Sokolsky doesn't respond, instead staring him down with an unreadable expression. A few minutes pass before the orderly returns with a white bottle with a nasal spray applicator, which Sokolsky takes. He kneels down beside Harkness and says that he's going to hate him in like 5 seconds, but they don't have time for this. Harkness continues to mutter nonsensical phrases before looking like he's about to fall asleep again. Sokolsky says that he takes enough naps during company hours and inserts the plastic nozzle into Harkness's nostril, releasing the vapor. Harkness jolts up, hits his head on the wall behind him, groans, and vomits. He swears multiple times and asks where he is and what happened. He rubs his temples and asks what happened with Casino Night. Sokolsky explains that they had to abandon the mission, and Harkness went AWOL. They found him demanding staff members of the Planet Fitness of North Palm Beach to show him to their Foundation embassy. Harkness says that mistakes happen, and asks if he has any gum. The next bit of text is from Harazm Kal, who just says that you must admit that it mostly went to plan. So, from the sounds of it, Operation Pickpocket was not an overwhelming success, which is not a huge surprise when we consider how disjointed the team seemed to be. Combining such a variety of personalities with such a potentially dangerous event into one spectacular heist was bound to go off course, and we'll just have to see how exactly off course it went. Stay tuned for part 3, as Sokolsky wrangles his team of misfits into a casino.
Heist. 8 Ball. Part 4. Or, nope,
When my
wrong
boyfriend-
one. Part 3. Sorry, it's just gonna be a slow stream tonight. I'm just slicing files.
SCP-8888 8 Ball Part 3. It would certainly be a boring piece of fiction if everything went according to plan. Sure, sometimes things seem to work out in the moment, but in the long run, there always has to be some sort of hitch to keep things interesting. So far, in SCP 8888, the plan to get the 8-ball back seems to consist of nothing but hitches, especially considering who's on the team. Dr. Sokolsky is leading a group of misfits consisting of placeholder McDoctorate, Director Hishikaku, Doctors Monsieur, Sumerian, and Weddle, Researcher Harkness, and Agent S.
Yes.
Together, they are about to head to a casino night being held at the Wanderer's Library in conjunction with demons from Under Vegas. Things are not going to go according to plan. Let's continue.
Save.
We pick things up with the various after-action reports from Sokolsky's team after Operation Pickpocket. The operation began in Florida at an empty Planet Fitness where they begin to change into their formal wear. Agent S presents Harkness with a comically large object in the rough shape of a colander, which she was not holding moments prior, causing him to wince. She also supplies hearbuds to each of the team after they change, although Weddle ends up breaking the lock on his stall, forcing Sokolsky to painstakingly extricate him from his misaligned suit and help him redress. Hishikaku then arrives as well, brandishing a hand of playing cards, which Agent S takes and remarks on them being pretty good. She asks him how he managed it, to which
go check the
Sokolsky just
printer.
says that he guesses he's really familiar with the library, the people who stole the 8-ball. Hishikaku begins to growl something in response, but Sokolsky just tells him to change into his fancy clothes. Agent S proceeds to hand the cards to each team member, with them now suffused with a golden glow. She remarks in excitement about having fake IDs, and says that this is what it must be like to be a teenager sneaking into the liquor store, with both her and Sokolsky noting that they were never really teenagers. Sokolsky chooses the Ace of Clubs, Hishikaku the Ace of Diamonds, Placeholder the Ace of Spades, Monsieur the Ace of Hearts. Weddle is given a Joker, causing him to close his eyes wearily, and Harkness takes a second Joker, just in case. Dr. Sumerian is handed the Rules card, causing him to nod and say, fair enough. Sokolsky then also hands Weddle a gleaming red pentacle, patting it for emphasis, and tells him that this is his spending money, and if he loses it, he'll make him expendable. The team then head into a storage room in the back of the building, which contains a single treadmill marked not for recreational use. Sokolsky gestures to Hishikaku, who waves his Ace of Diamonds card in front of the machine and says, knock knock. The treadmill grinds to life, and Sokolsky says for the mole to go first, but before Hishikaku can protest, he shoves him onto the treadmill, causing him to vanish. The rest of the team follow. They all emerge in the empty fitness section of the Wanderer's Library, and after picking Weddle up off of the floor and pulling Hishikaku out from a collapsed bookshelf, they proceed towards the Grand Hall. As the sound of excited voices and electronic music gets closer, Agent S separates from the group, grinning and saying that she'll be around. Sokolsky tells her to stay focused, and if their gadgets stop working, he'll be speaking in all caps to her boss. She replies that he shouldn't worry his pretty bald head, as she's an old pro, but she's not going to visit the seat of all magic without taking a few celebratory swivels as she pirouettes into the library. A bearded demon in a blood-red velour suit is standing guard at the entrance to the Grand Hall, this being Pluto, or 7-Ball. He examines the team's fake IDs carefully, nods, and allows them to pass. Sokolsky grins and says, Pocket 1, but Hishikaku tells him to not get cocky. Monsieur remarks on him using the word get, as the team finally arrives at casino night.
I already did the shoulders.
Back in the interrogation room with Sokolsky and Harkness, Sokolsky tells him that the North Palm Beach Planet Fitness is over a dozen kilometers from his post and is unaffiliated with the Foundation, because they are not affiliated with all Planet Fitnesses. Understandably, the police were contacted, but fortunately, Asset Recovery picked it up and made it to the scene first, sedating him. Harkness says that they must have been compromised and someone tipped off security, as the detail was tighter than the briefing said. He asks where everyone else is and if they all made it out. Sokolsky instead says that he needs to help him out, as Harkness had eyes on everyone and asks what happened. Harkness exclaims that he doesn't know, as it was sensory overload, and as he squints up at the flickering fluorescent lights, he moans that it still is. Sokolsky tells him to take it easy and hands him a bottle of water as he begins to breathe slowly in and out. Sokolsky tells him to walk him through what he did after they entered the library. Harkness says that his bit was to handle the on-site security, which includes the Sophonts, which are these interlinked magical constructs that he can hack. He says that it was like hacking, but something entirely new to him, and it messed with his head. Sokolsky asks if the flash forging went as expected, and Harkness says that the lab coats explained it to him by saying that their universe is surrounded by two bubbles, and nothing gets through those layers naturally, but sometimes the layers come very close to one another. The closer they are, the easier it is to poke a hole through them for a small time, so he used the electric saw that Agent S gave him. He pauses to ask if she got out okay, which she did, and then he says he used the saw to open the potentiality space suffusing the wall behind the way. He takes a few swigs from the water bottle, commenting on how warm it is, before continuing to say that the other side was just cold, empty darkness. It felt like it went on forever, and it was terrifying, but it was still better than Florida. Agent S got him that helmet that looks like a glowing pasta strainer, though. We then cut back to the storage room at the Planet Fitness, where Harkness has just finished stringing a set of leads into the dark space behind the treadmill portal, attaching the other ends to the treadmill itself, his helmet, and a monitor. He sits down on the belt and places the helmet on his head, projecting his consciousness into the Wanderer's Library network. He sits in an upright position on the floor, back turned to the empty black hole behind him, eyes fluttering and closed, green light pouring out past his lids. He accesses the security hive mind, an interlinked web of docents providing the Serpent's Hand security with a comprehensive overview of the gaming pit, a confirmation network periodically checking each local node against the overall consensus and triggering lockdown should discrepancies arise. His high CRV allows him to penetrate the hive without assimilation, and one node at a time, he subordinates each docent's connection to the network of connected vessels into his own consciousness. This is the equivalent to disconnecting a camera from a CCTV network, but the camera is an empty vessel cut off from a network of security drones. Harkness's awareness stands in for the disconnected node, and verifies the veracity of his own doctored reports. But what he doesn't expect is that his CRV is not only higher than the cognitive influence of the Sophont confirmation network, but higher than that of the collective itself. As a result of this, he subsumes the entire network, his consciousness becoming disoriented by division between each Sophont simultaneously, and they begin to behave erratically. The security chief for the night, a senior Serpent's Hand agent known as Midnight, or Fourball, takes notice. She purrs a command, and across the library, a draft of off-duty librarians is quietly begun. In the Grand Hall, which is tightly packed with wanderers on the slowest of days, is now almost literal pandemonium. A red-skinned Wrath demoness in a Foundation-issued leather jacket is pacing the tables, striking bodybuilder poses in the eyelines of any greed demons with particularly hungry gleams in their beady eyes, to dissuade them from artificially augmenting their luck. A number of demons from a dozen different principalities do much the same, occasionally shooting jealous or suspicious glances at the apparent turncoat. Behind a commandeered circulation desk, Baal, Lord of the Flies, or Six Ball, is tapping an earpiece and deploying a literally withering glare at anyone who dares interrupt him.
That'll work.
Across the hall, surrounded by agents with stances suggesting that they are both armed and want that fact to be generally known, is Three Ball, Randall House, director of Site 666. You may remember House from SCP-4661, as he handles the Foundation's site in Vegas that links to Under Vegas, a region of space connecting Vegas and the Fourth Circle of Hell. He is speaking very slowly with knitted brows to a hired demoness, who is repeating his every word and occasionally plunging one taloned finger into her ear and swizzling to improve the reception. Midnight observes the proceedings from a cushioned mat on an ivory plinth, her black fur gleaming purple in the gaudy casino light radiating from sensors hung on nothing at all. The air is dense with chatter from dozens of games from countless cultures, ages, and dimensions.
Water.
A satyr with a polished name tag reading Old Scratch is overseeing a round of Devil's Grip. Two translucent creatures shaped like gumdrops the size of a human head are hovering over the shoulders of a nonplussed pride demon, lecturing him on the finer points of exploding kittens. A professional player of Fizzbin flips the table and punches out both of his opponents, to the polite applause of impressed onlookers. One table's dealer is a particularly animated octopus who chides and berates his players under the watchful eyes of a pit demon pit boss. Another has only 4 arms and a relaxed smile, while the players at its table are staring and in 2 cases actually pointing daggers at each other, apparently beneath its notice. A wizened goblin gesticulates wildly at a mass of hanging folds of once fattened flesh, out of which a pair of equally animated arms attempt to flail in rough response. During lulls in the argument, the Lord of Sloth pauses to attend to a can of Slim Fast, carried on an edible rice plate by an equally edible retainer, all parties wincing with disgust at every sip. A bloated ball of fur stands atop yet another table, kicking its chips into the pot, while a barely dressed succubus grins wickedly, her victory only slightly undercut when the final chip is deposited into her left eye via precision kick. The lamplight occasionally captures a light dustfall or stray plane car drifting down from the highest of the hall's high rafters, where movement in the shadows suggests an exclusive high-altitude game of chance for the Shire set is also being hosted. It is, against and employing all possible odds, Under Vegas Casino Night at the Wanderer's Library, and with an unapologetic smile, Sokolsky shoves Dr. Weddle into the middle of it, shouting, "Bad luck." Sometime afterwards, Sokolsky is speaking to Hishikaku, calling him Mr. Robot and telling him to make it quick. Hishikaku replies that he will be reporting his version of events in full at the insistence of the Ethics Committee, with Sokolsky remarking on his version. Hishikaku says that Liaison Sumerian and him had been assigned to oversee, but he's cut off by Sokolsky saying there he goes again. Back in the Grand Hall, the remaining team members leave Weddle behind and make their way to the edge of the gaming pit. Sokolsky removes a VHS copy of The Great Escape from his suit and holds the sleeve by the sides, causing the tape to fall to the floor, at which point it soundlessly dissipates into a fine coating of dust. From the angle at which Sokolsky is standing, there is now a visible tunnel running through the floor at an orthogonal angle, and after stepping into it, he disappears. Placeholder sighs and says that that's not a heist either, as it's practically the opposite, and as Sumerian begins to mention that everyone in that movie dies, Monsieur gently places a hand over his mouth, telling him not to jinx things. The team proceed into the tunnel, which re-emerges from the library floor in an even dustier set of stacks far beyond the Grand Hall. Placeholder asks Sokolsky why he had to do that in the gaming pit, as it seems risky. But Sokolsky just responds that magic has stupid rules, and it's not a great escape if you can't get caught. Hishikaku falls back to speak with Sumerian, asking him why he went so pale back at the checkpoint, causing Sumerian to hesitate. He says that they were supposed to check any items that they didn't get from Agent S with her before they started, for masking purposes, but he forgot one. He pulls out a magic 8-ball from his pocket, causing Hishikaku to whistle and say that maybe Harkness prevented it from setting off the detectors. Sumerian smiles and says maybe, asking him if he's familiar with his SCP file. Hishikaku didn't even know he had one until that vague allusion at the meeting, and Sumerian says that he's the opposite of Weddle. Hishikaku considers this for a moment before saying that he should have been 7-ball then, although that's on the other team. Speaking of which, Hishikaku remarks that he's not sure Sokolsky's entirely on theirs, but Sumerian cocks his head and says that that's the pot calling the cue ball black. In Sokolsky and Hishikaku's conversation afterwards, Sokolsky says that he's sorry he missed that exchange. Hishikaku replies that he has a lot to say about the professionalism of his team in the field, and that's all he'll say on the matter. He can read the rest in his report, if he still has clearance by then. Back to the team. A stray docent, one of the librarians that guides visitors and punishes rule breakers, steps into their path from behind an empty stack. The team freezes except for Hishikaku, who steps forward and gestures at the rest of the team, saying that it's fine, he's handling them. Placeholder remarks sarcastically on how that's not suspicious at all, as the docent responds in a curiously familiar voice, stating, "I'm everybody. It's sick. I'm gonna throw up in my brain," before wandering off again. Sumerian steps forward to make sure it's gone before speaking into his earbud to ask if Agent S can confirm that the docents are acting strangely. She replies that they sure are, and it's really cute. One of them just punched a guy, and she thinks that Harkness is having a hard time. Sokolsky snaps that they better get a move on then. The section of the library that they're in is clearly disused and in a state of some disrepair. The occasional break in the pocket dimensional lining produces a mirroring effect, which is painful to observe. At several points, the team are confronted with an image of themselves reflected in the walls, and both versions studiously avoid making eye contact. After several more minutes, they reach a heavy stone portal set into a paneled wall, a disingenuous keycard reader inset by the jam. Sokolsky prods Hishikaku, calling him Ace-hole and telling him he's up. Hishikaku sighs as he steps up and swipes his ace of diamonds through the reader, telling Sokolsky that the term is ace in the hole. Sumerian counters that he's not in the hole yet, but they'll see how his next ethics committee review goes. The team looks down a passageway lined with kiln-fired red bricks, and Monsieur asks how much they know about what they'll be seeing next. Sokolsky explains that they're moving into the under-library, but she says that that doesn't really explain anything, which he agrees, but as he says that they shouldn't worry, he's interrupted. A loud, burpy voice burbles out the name Hishi, as a writhing mass of tentacles descends on the group. There are bubbles rising from the creature's toothy maw, and when they pop, the air is filled with a smell like ethanol, rare earth elements, and Pepto-Bismol. Hishikaku blushes as the creature pulls him into an embrace, and he greets it, calling it Jerry, but says that he's a little busy. Sokolsky, however, snatches the ace of diamonds from Hishikaku's fingers and ushers the rest of the team through the door, quietly closing it. He passes the card to Sumerian and winks. Later, Hishikaku says to Sokolsky that he promised that his abilities would be critical to the mission. Sokolsky counters that it wasn't a mission, it was an operation, and he said that he would be useful. Hishikaku replies that he would have been more useful had someone not directed Jerry to their location before the mission began. He knows how Sokolsky works, with nothing left to chance, so he threatened to sabotage his own operation just to insult him. Sokolsky, however, just responds by imitating Hishikaku, telling him that if he believes any variety of misconduct has transpired, it is of the utmost importance to Overwatch Council that he report to the Ethics Committee immediately. Hishikaku stutters without a response, and Sokolsky just says that they're done here. While the rest of the team proceeds further through the library, Dr. Weddle moves through the crowds in the Grand Hall, avoiding the games and walking around the pit floor. In the course of 5 minutes, he has accidentally accosted 17 distinct entities and 3 indistinct ones, with representatives of all 3 security forces now eyeing him. A pair of male wrath demons approach him, but the Foundation-aligned demoness intercedes with force, telling them that weak meat's on her plate tonight. One of the demons considers making an issue of this, but a glance at his partner, who is bleeding on the floor through the crotch of his pinstripe suit pants, dissuades him. He returns to the crowd, heading in Ball's direction, as Agent Calendar, or One Ball, pats Weddle on the shoulder. She remarks that it's early in the night for dancing, and Weddle replies that he's just trying to stay out of everybody's way, as he picks at the shredded sleeve of his cheap suit. Calendar smiles at him, which doesn't relieve Weddle due to the number, sharpness, and proximity of her teeth, and she says that that's how he wanted it to look, but she asks who his fence is and how much has he boosted so far. Weddle blinks in confusion, and she continues, asking what the take is, the scromboli, the ticky-ticky. Weddle visibly considers something for several seconds before saying that he doesn't think those last 2 things are anything. The demoness's face darkens further, and in a low growl she tells him that a few junior researchers she knows are going to find out how much funnier physical humor is, but for now he needs to give her everything he stole. Weddle looks around, seeing the Wrath Demon trying to talk to Ball, who is currently shouting into a large brick cell phone about hell firewire lag and how they need to get the game back on, as he's got souls riding on this. House is also shouting into a mouthpiece, having not noticed the smoke rising from the camp's comms equipment or the dark-skinned man with wild brown hair and a pair of comically large scissors in his hand, who is slipping away behind him. Several of the agents surrounding House are glancing in Weddle's direction, however, and Midnight is also doing so, her eyes shining bright yellow. Weddle asks Calendar if everyone here thinks he's a pickpocket, and she confirms it's either that or a really bad assassin. She slaps her fist into her palm and says that this is the part where he picks between turning out his pockets or her turning out his stomach, the hard way. He asks if that's an option, which confuses Calendar, and then says that he didn't steal anything, and his pockets aren't even real. He demonstrates, splitting one of his well-chewed nails in the process, and says that this suit cost him like $5, and he's just here to... something. He sighs and says that he's supposed to play, but he doesn't want to, as he's sort of famous for his luck. She nods at him and sarcastically calls him a high roller, telling him to get gaming. He begins to say that ideally he'd rather just... but she snarls at him, and he recalibrates. He says that it's not like he has much to offer, as all he's got is this credit mark. He reaches down to pat his pockets, but then realizes that he doesn't have pockets. Calendar takes notice of him saying credit mark and reaches into her tank top to draw out a small glowing pentacle. She tells him that a weird pervert over there said someone dropped it, giving it to her instead of keeping it. She gestures at a man in a brown patterned suit and cap, who is presently playing a game of Strip Go Fish in a topiaried enclosure. She shakes the mark in front of Weddle's face, asking if it's his. He sneezes, but the ambient glow turns from white to red, so she slaps it into his hands and begins moving him in the direction of the roulette tables. She tells him that she's got her eye on him, and says to not make her put her boot in him before kicking him in the rear. He stumbles into the nearest roulette table, tapping his mark of credit on a matching pentacle embossed into the wood, and presses his palm into it as he attempts to right himself. By the time he's stable again, the glow has diminished by almost half, and the dealer remarks on how they have a big spender here. Weddle's first throw deposits itself in the gasoline margarita of a gluttony demon, who responds by consuming his necktie up to the clavicle. The second loses him the entirety of his bet. He glances over his shoulder and notices Calendar is still watching him, Bale glaring balefully at him, Midnight's eyes narrowing to amber slits, and House shouting at an agent who is sheepishly taking down a banner reading Site 777. He proceeds to place a much smaller second bet, and over the course of the next half hour, he visits each of the gambling tables and devices on the floor. One result is the depletion of his mark of credit, and its transformation into a jet black mark of debit, which makes the other patrons visibly nervous, and the greed demons salivate. What follows is a series of events during Weddle's time in the Grand Hall. A man in a fine blue silk suit, square eyeglasses, and a gleaming star tie pin challenges Weddle to a slot machine earnings contest, offering to restore his lost credit to enable this. Weddle agrees, but leaves this encounter with the debit mark emitting a cloud of darkness so thick that it coats his own glasses with ash. Weddle's suit, improperly pressed, begins to shrink, and a button flies off, landing in the mouth of one of his poker opponents. They begin to choke, and in their panic, accidentally shove their chips to the center of the table. They win the hand with a 7 deuce, finally expelling the button directly into Weddle's eye. The Internal Revenue Service and Canada Revenue Agency open a joint inquiry into Weddle's finances at the exact moment he loses 20 chips after putting in only 10 and folding after the big blind. Sokolsky's ace of clubs inexplicably falls out of Weddle's sleeve as another player drops their hand on the floor, and they retrieve the extra card by mistake. An Under Vegas pit boss, suspicious of the accident, investigates, discovering that the player possesses 5 aces. Midnight intervenes, accusing the player of forging library credentials, and they are removed from the pit to an uncertain fate in the depths of the library. 163 participants in the bingo parlor each win the same $50 Applebee's gift card, and a riot ensues. A pink-haired waitress with heterochromia is tipped 5,333 chips by a concerned patron, and she accidentally places them on a blackjack table while spilling another drink directly on Weddle's head. The dealer mistakes it for a valid bet and pays 2 to 3 for a win, with the dealer overpaying the bet payout by 1 chip, and the waitress doesn't correct him on any of these mistakes. Still wet from the drink, Weddle slips and falls in transit to a roulette wheel, as a refuse demon wins at roulette 24 times in a row, turning a single chip into a controlling interest in the third circle of adversarial hell. Weddle is trampled by a giant hirsute goose, with its origin unknown, and Dr. Alto Clef, present at the library on an unrelated mission, is nearly captured by security demons, but Weddle's serial pratfalling into their midst provides enough of a distraction to allow him to escape. A gambler bumps into Weddle, attempting to pick his pocket, and Harkness's Joker card, which is inexplicably present, is stolen. The card is eventually discarded by the thief, and then picked up by a Crazy Eights player who immediately wins the game. Weddle plays Go Fish, during which he issues the semantically correct instruction, Go Fish, to an opponent, who takes mortal insult due to his 1/4 Deep One heritage. On a lucky spin, Weddle wins a luxury sports car and is instructed to sit in the driver's seat so that his photograph might be taken. As this would compromise his identity and most likely alert the library to the presence of the team, he attempts to exit the car by climbing over to the passenger side, accidentally putting it into neutral, activating the radio with his shoe, and proceeds to fall halfway out of the car's passenger side window while Milkshake by Kellis plays at full volume. After a few seconds, he ceases struggling and simply waits to be extricated. 16 separate individuals win jackpots at the slot machines during the interval before security arrives. Weddle then attempts to rest at a heater table, which immediately catches fire. The cacophony of every electronic gambling machine in the pit registering a jackpot simultaneously produces a cavalcade of fallen patrons as the floor is carpeted in coinage. Attempting to leave the pit altogether, Weddle steps on an inebriate Fey libertine, who immediately leaps to his feet and punches Weddle in the nose. Later, when discussing the mission, Dr. Monsieur notes that the serpent's nest is a palimpsest, meaning something which has been reused with traces of the original still remaining, often referring to documents. She says that the stone spoke volumes to her, with tail fragments bleeding into and out of each other across the underlibrary, relics of peoples long lost plucked from their context and incorporated into one eternal archive. Placeholder mentions that there was a tunnel composed entirely of chitin, and if you touched the plates, they chittered in alien tongues. If they were telling stories, they couldn't understand them, and he doesn't know who could. Monsieur suggests that perhaps the 8th archivist of the library could, as he has plenty of chitin of his own. Placeholder continues, mentioning non-Euclidean passages of weeping dripstone paved with engraved menhirs depicting gods and god-queens, a stair of gleaming green crystal that sang like wine glasses on a sleepy Christmas night, and oak floorboards flanked by moldering tomes on creaky shelves. Monsieur calls it salvage custodianship, and it's not colonial, but maternal. It's the mother of all libraries, ensconced by keepsakes from its departed children. Placeholder quips that it's also creepy as hell, but Monsieur just continues, saying that it's disused, not forgotten, but not well trafficked either. She thinks that the library shuffles its collections about in response to demand, and the decimals in decline are remanded to the depths. The muddle of borrowed architecture coheres into a vast foyer in industrial Victorian style, towering many stories above the team and disappearing into steam. Streams of a sludgy gray binding glue pour from apertures in the ceiling into elephantine churning vats. Gleaming chrome bellows and pistons are driven by complex arrays of interlocking beryllium bronze gears on the walls. The room is lit in rich reds and oranges by a tube of flowing magma, the sheath composed of pure orichalcos, and it hums and thrums with light. Sumerian is the first to speak, asking why a magical library needs a mechanical power plant. Monsieur explains that by the time electric light and heating was invented, anything that could cast perpetual magic was either dead or gone out of the mortal planes. Machines, however, you can set and forget, even magical machines. Placeholder asks if they would have put something as valuable as 8-Ball down here with the plumbing, unguarded, but Monsieur agrees that no, they wouldn't. Sokolsky examines the doors, finding the seam between them is too thin to admit even the thinnest piece of paper. He glances at Monsieur, who takes out her card, taps the doors once each, and then appears to realize something before suddenly walking through the doors. The doors then open, and Monsieur is smiling brightly on the other side. She explains that there's a scrap of Apocrypha claiming the library contracted Isambard Kingdom Brunel to modernize their engineering. She recognized him in the gear arrangements up there, and says that he had some wild theories about how much work you could save if you could somehow reverse the order of cause and effect, nearly losing him all his railway contracts. Naturally, she figured that she could walk through the door and it would open. Placeholder rubs his forehead, saying that he would have never thought of that, but Sokolsky just says that he would have, as he brushes past Monsieur. After another few minutes, he would have gone back for Hishikaku and tried opening the doors with his skull. Later, Monsieur recounts that from that point on, it was nothing but pipes and steam and metal grating, all of it shining like it had just been polished. Placeholder remarks that thaumic energy is pretty clean, and Monsieur mentions that it was cute how he tried to walk through the next sealed door. Placeholder just replies that long-dead engineers all look the same to him. Back in the present time of the mission, Placeholder rubs his forehead as the others consider the door, which is single rather than double this time. Sokolsky wraps his knuckles on it, with it sounding thick, and there is a slit cut into the center. He considers his card carefully before Monsieur declares that she'll go first. If they need credentials to go further, there might be warning signs the rest of them won't see in time. Placeholder, his nose reddening, says that he has no arguments with that, so Monsieur places her card in the slot, and it's immediately sucked inside before the door begins sliding up into the ceiling. The tunnel beyond is carved white stone, and she raises an eyebrow at Sokolsky, who just shrugs. She steps through the door, and it slams shut behind her. Sumerian calls out to her, and she replies with a muffled voice that she's fine, and her card came out the other side. Placeholder then follows with some trepidation, and as before, the door slams shut behind him. Sokolsky then places his card in the slot, but the floor grating beneath his feet gives way, and he falls out of sight without a sound. The card is immediately ejected, and it is visibly a joker. The grating closes again as Sumerian stutters and Placeholder calls out asking what happened. A siren begins sounding as Sumerian yells back that it didn't like Sokolsky's card, and he fell. Sokolsky yells through their earbuds for them to get out of there, as they'll be sending people, or worse. As the barely audible sound of Sumerian's hurried footfalls becomes completely inaudible, Placeholder and Monsieur push onward. Placeholder taps his earbud, asking if Sokolsky is there, but gets no response. The two agree that he'll be alright, but they did just trip an alarm, so they're on a time limit now. As they approach the end of the stone tunnel, they see that they are also approaching a vast cistern, composed of endless bubbles of brilliant golden stone. Their tunnel meets it halfway up, and they look down at the dizzying depth. An aircraft carrier stood on one end would fit comfortably in the space, and every nook and cranny is at least partially illuminated. Inside of the space is a tremendous tiered lighthouse, the signal atop its octagonal pylon turning slowly, casting gentle arcs of light on countless other tunnels like theirs. Placeholder watches it turn for just a moment before commenting that this is a problem. Monsieur agrees, asking if this is 5-ball. He furrows his brow and says that Sokolsky said there was a sentry in the under-library, and this certainly qualifies. The light is orange, too, and so are real 5-balls, so yeah, he guesses so. She then asks if it looks familiar to him by any chance, but he says not particularly, and she clicks her tongue. The light is 1/4 turn away from illuminating them now, and she kneels down, noting that the paving stones they have been treading on continue down the walls at a 90-degree angle. She remarks that she's pretty sure that they could just keep walking if he doesn't mind taking a step of faith. Placeholder peers over the edge and says that he always thought Euclidean geometry was plenty good enough. He takes a deep breath and says that he doesn't think they want that light to find them, though. He then raises his hands up to shield his eyes from the sudden glare alongside Monsieur, and a voice booms out through the cavern. It states that even very small, their voices carry. The lighthouse has finished its rotation prematurely and is shining its light directly on them. Monsieur hisses to Placeholder that he said he was the face of the party, so Placeholder clears his throat and greets the lighthouse. He asks if he's speaking to the lighthouse or someone inside of it. It replies that he is addressing the Lantern of Ptolemy, first and second. Its lambent light pierces to the heart of all things. Monsieur remarks that it's the Pharos, the lighthouse of Alexandria, and Placeholder just says, of course. He asks it if he's speaking to a wonder of the ancient world, but there's a pause, and the voice sounds moderately less confident when it speaks again, stating that it doesn't know what that is. Monsieur asks if they can have a timeout, and the light perceptibly brightens before telling them to not attempt any flight. Placeholder says to not worry, as he can't fly and it's a long way down. Monsieur tells him that it probably means not to run, and the lighthouse confirms it, asking if they have perhaps heard of Archimedes' beacon. Monsieur muses that she thought that was in Syracuse, before telling Placeholder that it's claiming to have a death laser. Placeholder nods and says that they promise they're not going far, and the light blinks once before the two head back down the tunnel to get away from the light. Placeholder says that he doesn't remember anything about the Pharos of Alexandria being sapient or kidnapped. Monsieur smirks, telling him that he's behind on the literature. That wreckage they found in the harbor was all wrong for the period, and not nearly enough of it. They're pretty sure that the explanation of the lighthouse being destroyed by earthquakes was just a cover story by some ancient foundation or relatively less ancient library precursor. Placeholder asks what they covered up, a lighthouse standing up and walking away, or did the Colossus of Rhodes swim across the Aegean to take it on a date? Monsieur replies that the point is that it disappeared around 1000 AD, about 1,000 years after Caesar burned the library, maybe 700 after what was left disappeared. Placeholder takes her meaning, that the archivists collected the Library of Alexandria, like all the lost libraries they've been walking through tonight, and they eventually stole the Pharos as well. He wonders why they didn't just take the lighthouse at the same time as the library, and Monsieur suggests that it's because the collection increased in value a few hundred years later. Placeholder realizes then, slapping his forehead, and they agree that the lighthouse has the vault inside of it, with Monsieur suggesting that maybe it always did. Placeholder glances up at the beacon as though seeing it for the first time and gasps, and she smiles, saying a sentence in classical Greek meaning, "Always the great God applies geometry to the universe." Later, Placeholder says to Monsieur that he can't believe he never made that connection, as he used to be the director. She replies that that's the thing about parallels, they don't intersect. Back in the present, the lighthouse calls out to them, telling them that if they are saying goodbyes, they need not be so dramatic. Their hosts are not barbarians, and at worst, you will be imprisoned within its bosom for all eternity. Placeholder says to Monsieur that he has a play in mind, and asks if she's game to try. She just nods, and they walk back towards the lighthouse together. Placeholder asks it if it's good to be among its people again after all these many years. The lighthouse appears to blink and ask to what he refers. Placeholder gestures at the both of them and says that it hails from Alexandria, and they're its cousins from across the sea, Greece. The lighthouse agrees that they are welcome, and it sees the fire of Hellas reflected in their bold gambit, but it will not avail them much. It has a duty here that extends beyond mere kinship. Placeholder asks it if it serves the wanderers and the archivists of the library. It replies that it is of their flesh composed, and it also serves the legacy of the pharaohs of the Ptolemaic kingdom, their people, and the ships as ply the waves to their shores. That final duty is admittedly in abeyance at present. Placeholder then asks who Ptolemy serves, to which it responds, none but the gods themselves. He smiles and says that that's very convenient because he is a god. There's another pause, and the lighthouse says that he does not look like a god. He spreads his arms and remarks that it said its light pierces to the heart of all things, so get with the piercing. Not literally, but take a good long look at him and tell him who it thinks he is. He closes his eyes as the light narrows its cone to cover only him, increasing in intensity until he's little more than a silhouette. Then the light dims, almost dying, and it says that he is no god. He is no one. Placeholder visibly deflates, and Monsieur pats him on the shoulder, telling him that they already knew about identity abstraction in ancient Alexandria. She then raises her voice and addresses the lighthouse, telling it that that wasn't very nice, and she insists that it apologize. It begins to say that she is in no position to insist, but she cuts it off, spreading her own arms wide, and tells it to shine its little light on her and see what it sees. The light again increases in intensity, but only for an instant before snapping off entirely. It apologizes and says that it did not know, bidding her to approach. Placeholder is quite confused as Monsieur begins walking down the vertical face of the cistern, gravity apparently reorienting itself around her. Later, Placeholder notes to not bother asking her what it saw, as she won't tell. Monsieur replies that you don't spend a lifetime fertiling out secrets without picking up a few of your own. The lighthouse is reverently silent as they approach, but its doors do not open. Placeholder tugs on the handles, frowns, then raises a hand to knock. The lighthouse speaks in a vaguely apologetic tone, saying that they may not enter, and there are thresholds beyond which even gods may not pass. Placeholder grumbles that that whole pantomime got them nothing, but Monsieur replies that it got them not disintegrated. She examines the doors more closely with her blind eyes, explaining that they've been reinforced, thaumatically. They'll only open if the Pharos wants them to, but there's probably a central ley line node in the lantern room. The glass up there is orichalcos, so nothing they can do from here will make a scratch. Placeholder muses on the term scratch before smacking his forehead again and saying that Sokolsky takes too much for granted and it's going to get him killed, as he's not Batman. He taps his earbud and asks Sokolsky if he's in the Pharos. Sokolsky responds in the affirmative in a cheerful voice, telling Placeholder that it took him long enough. Placeholder mutters that the first question a master schemer would have asked the 8-ball is how do I keep you from being stolen? The second is how do I get you back if you are? And it told him, meaning Sokolsky, because of course it was him who asked, that every cage which can hold it was designed by it, and how to game the system. Sokolsky replies that more specifically, it told him that the system is a game. Placeholder sighs and says that scratch is a pool term for when you pocket the cue ball on your shot, and the other guy gets to put it wherever he wants. The prison pocketed cue ball, probably by putting him into probability space, and alerted the library that a major threat had appeared and been captured. Naturally, the library stuck him where he couldn't do any harm, inside the Pharos, right in front of the vault. Sokolsky finishes by saying that that vault has a lock the size of a dump truck tire covered in just about every mythological symbol you can imagine, which he hasn't got the faintest idea how to open. Other than that, though, he thinks that this was a damn fine plan. Placeholder realizes then that Weddle was wrong, and that's why he called himself Q-Ball. Sokolsky remarked that Placeholder should have seen that coming, but Monsieur asks why he didn't just explain the whole plan to them ahead of time. He replies that they would have known then, and then the library might have figured it out from them. The library has patrons who can sense a burning secret, and other than him, only Harkness has a registered CRV strong enough to resist them. Placeholder asks if he told Harkness then, to which Sokolsky laughs and says no. Monsieur shakes her head and says that let's say that they can brute force, broken telephone their way through that puzzle in there, and they get the vault open. Sokolsky will still be trapped. Sokolsky replies that he's not playing keep talking or nobody gets the 8-ball for an hour. The two of them are coming in there themselves. Placeholder blinks in confusion and asks how. Sokolsky explains that the library didn't put him back on the table after he scratched, because it doesn't know the rules of pool. It put him in another pocket. The library scratched, and since he knows that it's listening, he would like it to place him in the lantern room, and to try not to commit another foul while it's at it, because he did come here with a list of potential stretch goals. There are no sounds of note for several seconds, and then the doors swing open. We're given another transcript of some enigmatic footage, but I'll take the time to mention a translation error I made in the previous part. The coded text from the previous enigmatic footage was in octal, not decimal, and actually read, "Attempt movement, no response. Attempt interface, no response. Attempt empathize, no response. Redundant verification complete. Course correct. Commence machination." Thanks to user Jamie7367 for pointing that out. This piece of enigmatic footage begins with it looking out from a nest of clockwork and chaos, ordering its surroundings with the cool light of reason. It sits on the deck of a mighty trireme, sails furled, surrounded by the bustle of nautical preparation. Hero of Alexandria, famed inventor, directs his workmen on the deck, shooting occasional proprietary glances at its unblinking eye and smiling enigmatically. Said eye is rimmed with mechanical implements, foreign and supplementary and encaging, obscuring little but signifying much. It sits on the stern. It will be in control. It will plot the course, as is its nature and purpose and infallible skill. There is a library on one horizon, and to the sea a lighthouse on the other. They are kin, these three. An ersatz Diogenes approaches from the wharf. The workmen do not notice. Hero does not notice. He is aged and weathered, and his face is asymmetrically scarred. He is looking directly into the eye. He, too, is smiling. Its vision swims. It is still on the deck. The deck is awash. The damage is done. There are fish. They, too, are curious. They approach. Another coded message here reads, "Attempt empathize. Result sustain." There are materials to hand. They are not the same as steel and glass and copper beryllium, but they will serve, as it does, as it always will do, whether it wishes to or not. With that, we're nearing the climax of this heist story. Sokolsky, Placeholder, and Monsieur are in front of the vault containing the 8-ball. Weddle is having a ball of a time at casino night. Hishikaku is in the loving embrace of a creature named Jerry. Harkness is busy projecting his consciousness into the library's network, and Sumerian and Agent S's whereabouts are currently unknown. So far, the plan has gone reasonably well, but we know, of course, that it won't end that way. Things are about to take a turn for the worse, so stay tuned for the thrilling conclusion of Operation Pickpocket in Part 4.
Whether it's a first home,
Yeah, got an ad.
8888. 8
Excuse
Ball,
me.
Part 4. We're knee deep in a heist right now, with things about to turn a corner. Dr. Weddle has been providing a great distraction for the library in the middle of the Grand Hall, and Sokolsky, Monsier, and Placeholder are closer than ever to getting the 8 Ball back. It's not over until it's over, however, and like any good heist film, there's still some twists and turns left in store for our crew of misfits. Let's get back
Yay.
into it for the final part of SCP-8888.
88.
We pick things up right where we left off, with Dr. Monsier and Placeholder McDoctorate stepping into the lighthouse and walking up to the vault door. The moment they see it, they both gasp, and Sokolsky asks if that's a good gasp. Monsier replies that it's a very good gasp, as she runs her hand reverently over the massive array of ornate clockwork. She says that this is Hero's engine, but Placeholder says that this isn't, as Hero's engine is an old-timey turbine. Monsier just shakes her head and says that that's the cover story, as the real one was lost, at least until now, and they wanted to get ahead of the myth. Hero of Alexandria was said to have developed a perfect mechanical lock powered by beryllium bronze clockwork, which is what this is. Hero was also associated with the 8 Ball, where it appears in antiquity, as has the lighthouse and the library in Alexandria. Sokolsky nods and remarks that history repeats, but Monsier corrects him by saying that historians repeat, history cycles. Placeholder reaches out to manipulate the device's massive hands, as there are 8 sets in color-coded groups of 3. They turn easily, and the gears sing in their housings as he does so. He explains that the outer dial represents the Jungian archetypes, the inner dial the overseers, one of the middle dials is the Olympic gods, and the other is piss right off. Sokolsky asks if he can figure it out, and Placeholder nods, saying that he thinks someone's been making a few additions to this thing, because he's pretty sure that they didn't have billiards in classical antiquity. There's 15 balls, cue ball included, and there's no points for guessing which one's missing. He pulls the hands into position, naming a member of the heist crew each time he does so. Sokolsky, the ruler, Zeus, cue ball, practician. Monsier, the sage, Apollo, 9 Ball, Oracle. The remainder of the process goes smoothly, with Placeholder identifying Weddle as a joker for obvious reasons, Sumerian as the humanist for his ethics committee connections, and Hishikaku as an outlaw for reasons they've all been thinking and frequently speaking aloud. At the moment he manipulates the final hand to identify Agent S as a magician associated with Artemis and 0511, the hands abruptly spin back into place with a machine gun whir, the gears spin madly, a low tone sounds, and the vault door swings open to reveal its contents. Sokolsky breathes out the word fantastic as he strides into the empty vault, pulls a celery stick out of his suit, and begins pointing it at every exposed surface. Placeholder remarks incredulously that it's not here, and Sokolsky replies in an almost giddy tone that of course it isn't, as that would have been too hard. If you put that much effort into a heist, and Placeholder finishes his sentence excitedly, that you've got to be on the wrong trail. Sokolsky looks down at the celery stick, apparently receiving some sort of readout, and mutters about Sumerian's fingerprints. He remarks that this place looks like it hasn't been opened since '93, and Placeholder asks if this was all for nothing. Monsier says hardly and steps in, as she suddenly begins to tremble. Her milky eyes begin to softly glow, and she smiles at the other two, but she looks terrified. She tells them that they're very near the foundations of the library. She sees the serpent, and it sees her too. Sokolsky just nods and says that he thinks perhaps they had better heist their asses out of this vault. Meanwhile, at casino night, things have dissolved into less agreeable chaos. The Serpent's Hand agents are attempting to hold back a flood of angry patrons demanding to cash out their chips, while the Under Vegas bankers consult a massive tome of arcane contractual caveats to escape their now impossible to fulfill obligations. Midnight is screaming and yowling at Baal, who is threatening to double dribble her, and there is a sense of double entendre. Site 666 demonologist Dr. Contessa Thorner, or Tubal, is observing altercations between demons and wanderers from a high gallery, and performing triage exorcisms to prevent fatal escalation. The small, furry patron is driving the auto rickshaw in circles through the crowd, while the corpulent, gelatinous form of the Demon King Asmodeus is writhing and bellowing wetly as a series of violent ripples pass through his body. He is attempting to smother Agent Calendar, and she is pistoning punches at his underbelly and laughing in unrestrained glee. A reporter for the Planetsthi Press is interviewing the combatants, occasionally stealing unattended drinks and flinging hexes wherever they seem most likely to generate the best copy for the special edition. A wrath demon pile drives a beam of pure electricity into the Under Vegas camp's Hi-He Fi-Wi router, and it is sucked into the library's thaumato-electrical system. Below, in the underlibrary, the sudden power flicker allows McDoctorate, Monsieur, and Sokolsky to escape the locked-down door to the Pharos' chamber. Hand thaumaturges and Under Vegas witches are streaming into the space, which is expanding rapidly to accommodate its contents. Docents are banishing violators of the library's rules against violence, vandalism, profane speech, and cannibalism at a rate which does little to reduce the scope of the scrum. Dr. Weddle cowers in the center of this activity, suit in tatters, whimpering. Elsewhere in the library, unbeknownst to him, Dr. Sumerian is about to be discovered by a detachment of Midnight's deputized special librarians, who are responding to both Harkness's disruption of the docent web and Sokolsky's tripping of the security wards in the underlibrary. A sudden shudder passes through the entirety of the library, however, and they stop in their tracks long enough for him to notice them. He ducks into a side passage just as a keening alarum wails from the depths, accompanied by a deafening gong, and a high, chittering voice cries through an invisible public address system. It shouts for a code serpentine, and for all agents to proceed to the Grand Hall by order of the 8th Archivist. The special librarians turn and run in the opposite direction, as Sumerian slips past, consulting a small object in his hand and nodding. The 8th Archivist of the Wanderer's Library, a massive red and brown arthropod known as the Rounderpede, previously seen on this channel during SCP-6500, crashes through the Arcadia Pachinko Parlor, scattering patrons and balls in every direction in its haste to confront Director House at the Site-666 camp. It screeches at him that he has awoken the serpent, but House, who is presently kicking the toner out of a laser printer, glares at the archivist and says that if that's his professional wrestling entrance, then it sucks. The archivist just roars in frustration and fear, shouting that it's the serpent, and House now realizes what it means, the creator of the Wanderer's Library. The archivist continues shouting, saying that the docents are in an uproar, the librarians are in a tizzy, its carapace is itching, and it's all House's fault. It extends a prehensile tongue out towards House, who bats it away with an extracted toner cartridge, and retorts that they weren't even being that loud, at least before whatever this is. They also had permits, and there was nothing about a noise bylaw in the agreement, as he would have remembered a clause about not waking up primordial entities. The special librarians file into the Grand Hall and begin canceling library cards en masse. Ball immediately responds by opening a Tartarian portal, and the combined might of Python's Spirits of Line and Astaroth's Colluminators, the two top-ranked basketball teams of Hell currently, file out, form a phalanx, and begin tackling the special librarians. Sokolsky is the first to escape the underlibrary, emerging onto the ground level and pulling Hishikaku by the ear. As the others join him, Agent S rushes up with a wide grin on her face, stating that this is the best day of her life. Placeholder notes that the distraction seems to be a little too distracting, as the Grand Hall now holds almost the entire active population of the library, and the automatically generated tables and research corrals are being repurposed as barricades and makeshift battle tanks. He asks if Weddle is in there somewhere, and Monsieur just laughs, while Hishikaku shakes himself free from Sokolsky's grip, shouting that they can't get through that, and it's the only way back to Planet Fitness. One of the basketball demons brought a boombox with them, and they have begun blasting Rob Zombie's Dragula on loop, presumably ironically. Sokolsky turns to Agent S and asks if she has any gadgets that can get them through there, to which she just giggles and notes that that's a rhetorical question. The team proceeds to exfiltrate through the center of the Grand Hall, snatching up Dr. Weddle on the way, who is wailing that he doesn't know what's happening. They're inside of the exclusion zone of a gaudy rainbow umbrella that Agent S terms the foul-weather friend, and they're almost through the crowd when Weddle's pocket explodes in a flash of green light, throwing them through the catering tables in a hail of devil's food. Several individuals present during Weddle's initial round of distractions, including the man who cut House's comms, the man who returned Weddle's mark of credit, the woman who poured her drink on his head, and the man who embarrassed him at the arcade, assemble from every direction. The woman stops to help Agent S to her feet, and they embrace warmly. Both of the women are weeping openly, and the group standing around them are grinning and holding back tears. Placeholder extricates himself from a pile of blood sausage and asks if that's SCP-040, which Sokolsky confirms, stating that this is the House of Stars. Without getting too much into it, SCP-040 was a young girl that the Foundation recovered from a raid on a school for gifted youth, finding that she possesses the anomalous ability to manipulate the physical characteristics of living organisms. She eventually breached containment at the age of 16 as her powers grew, and shortly thereafter was found to be working with the House of Stars, an old, small group of interests that pulls off heists against anomalous organizations. Hishikaku screams that there's another heist going on, before getting hit in the back of the head with a book thrown from a high gallery by Contessa. The exclusion zone has vanished now, and the chaotic crowd begins closing back in until everything stops. Agent S has produced the heart-shaped padlock, apparently from thin air, and snapped it shut, causing the room to go still. She clears her throat daintily before beginning to speak, addressing the Foundation personnel as the leader of the House of Stars snatches up Weddle's fallen carnation and ambles towards the Site-666 camp. Agent S tells the group that they canceled her childhood, as they couldn't understand her and couldn't control her, so instead they put her in a coma. They did that to a child, and then let some maniac try to murder her. There is a single cough in the distance, as one individual is apparently still moving in the crowd, but they are moving away at a rapid clip. Agent S narrows her eyes, and her throat is catching on every word now. She says that they stole her from her family, and the House of Stars stole her from them. Now she's stealing herself back. She puffs out her chest and theatrically discards her dark magician's outfit with a flourish, revealing a bright and multicolored witch's costume beneath. She states that her name is Sigaros Stefansdottir, not Agent S, not SCP-239, and she's going to make them wish that they tried to play along with her fantasies. She then shouts, "Gatornade," and flings an object at her feet, causing it to burst and a rush of stagnant water to pour out. There are live alligators in it, and they begin snapping at the feet of the startled team. When the mist has fallen, Agent S and the House of Stars are gone, except for the leader, who leans forward to whisper in Director House's ear, whilst tickling it with the carnation, so that the entire team except for Weddle can hear him. He simply says that the House always wins, before kicking House in the shins and disappearing. The monolock hangs, suspended in the air for a moment longer,
Still
then
waiting for that
unlocks
foot to
itself
be
and
repaired.
falls into the sudden swamp with a splash. Action immediately resumes, and Agent Calendar leaps across the hall to pummel the alligators with periodic cries of sheer joy. Placeholder asks Sokolsky if that was part of his plan, and he just shrugs, saying that it's MC and D. What do you expect? There is another shudder in the floor, this time more violent and causing many of the rioters to be thrown to the ground, and Placeholder asks where Sumerian is. Hishikaku shrieks, "Who cares?" while Sokolsky shrugs again and says that he's probably fine, as the team begins running. Meanwhile, Director House is being pursued through the ruins of Casino Night by the Archivist, which is screeching that they told it that House was cool and a bookie. House screams back that that isn't what a bookie is, as he trips and crashes through a chocolate waterfall. In the storage room of the Planet Fitness, Harkness is still unconscious, though the lights on the device have changed from angry red to flashing yellow. They suddenly flash red again, and he sees an abrupt intrusion on his vision, a digital representation of the Tower of Babel, which deforms into a tall, dark-skinned, androgynous figure in a flowing blue robe. It makes a shooing gesture, and Harkness's eyes suddenly snap open. At the same moment, the treadmill catches fire. He begins to scream and leaps to his feet, his helmet pulling leads out of the hole and off the burning treadmill, causing the monitor to fall to the floor with a crash. Harkness catches a glimpse of themselves in the reflection of the monitor, which doesn't help the situation. Until that moment, he hadn't noticed what was in the room with him. Dozens of other Harknesses, staring motionless up from the screen. The Sophonts are only the construction. The Hive gives the instruction. Hive Harkness. A sound like that of a wounded animal escapes his mouth, but it doesn't feel like his mouth anymore. The remainder of the Hive buzzes like cicadas in unison. He runs towards the door and out into the blinding light. Battered, bruised, and covered in a variety of fluids, solids, and at least one type of plasma, the team reaches the portal back to the Planet Fitness, but it's shut. Weddle groans, but Sokolsky says that it's fine, as he's still got one trick up his sleeve, and he shakes out his jacket. A tiny, stoppered vial slides into his palm, with a glowing pinprick of light at the center. He unstoppers it and blows over the rim, causing a will-o'-the-wisp to dance into the air. Placeholder sighs and asks, "Where there's a will, there's a way?" Sokolsky agrees that Agent S did love her little jokes, but the wisp strikes the wall where the way should be, spelling out a message in brilliant blue. It reads, "Screw you guys. None of my stuff will work for you now. Good luck. Love, Siggy." Hishikaku slaps Sokolsky on the shoulder as the shadow of the Archivist falls over them, and he says that he tried, but they can't all be geniuses. The team is led past the carnage of Casino Night, as a small, furry patron is jumping up and down on the pulverized remains of Asmodeus, which gurgles with either agony or good humor. A basketballer is wiping a variety of colorful fluids off of his boombox with his uniform, revealing a tank top underneath which reads, "I got 666 problems, but my witch ain't one." The octopus is directing a small army of dazed-looking docents with brooms, to little avail, and the grand hall is gradually shrinking, its detritus vanishing into the depths of the library as the team is led into them. Director House, sporting a shredded tie and what looks like mandible marks on his ruined suit, is waiting in the archives alongside Midnight and Ball. The archivist turns to address Sokolsky, but is interrupted by Director House, who leaps forward and punches Sokolsky in the face, although House howls in pain in response. Placeholder remarks that he expected Sokolsky to dodge that, but he just replies that he has a magic face shield from COVID and from people constantly wanting to punch him in the face. The archivist states that they have abused the library's hospitality, with Midnight, House, and Ball agreeing, and it says that what was sacred has been profaned, and trust has been breached. Sokolsky apologizes for the whole breaking and entering bit, but they have to admit that they had it coming. They wouldn't have snuck into their top-secret lighthouse, Playhouse, if they hadn't stolen the 8-ball. The archivist, however, didn't even know that they broke into the lighthouse. Well, Midnight says that she did, but says that it was small potatoes. Sokolsky asks what they're talking about then, to which they all state in unison, casino night. They worked really hard on it, with Midnight even making gift bags, and House asks why they didn't just tell him they were pulling a heist, as they're on the same side, and he's the heist guy. Sokolsky replies by asking him if he would have cooperated if he had been told, but he just says no, of course not. The archivist asks if by the 8-ball they mean the remains of the heroic archivist, but Monsieur replies that she doesn't think any of her friends know about that yet. Hishikaku asks Monsieur how she knows something that he doesn't about the 8-ball, and the archivist wonders why none of them seem to know what's going on, and it really hopes that they didn't lose it. Sokolsky replies that they thought the library had it, but the archivist says that they thought the Foundation had it. House just wonders what they're all talking about, leading to some bickering between him, Sokolsky, and Hishikaku, with Sokolsky telling House that he's not used to losing, as he has that whole catchphrase about it, and he got that thrown in his face. This leads to more bickering, with Sokolsky telling House that he was codenamed 3-ball for the heist, because red is his color, but House is upset that he wasn't first. Weddle interrupts the arguments by asking if he needs to be here, before asking Sokolsky if he was his pick from Site-43. Sokolsky moves on, saying that they can all agree that it's a pretty big problem that they don't know where this thing is, and they should just let them go so they can figure out who has this extremely dangerous, predictive mechanism before it gets them all killed. The archivist and Midnight both agree, however, that they'll probably be fine, and they're not going to let them go without a bribe. They decide that they'll let them go if the Foundation agrees to cover the cost of repairing everything damaged or expended during casino night, make whole all injured parties, make a substantial contribution to the Mana Charitable Foundation's Sapient Bug Emotional Trauma Fund, sponsor the next casino night without any rights of attendance, and Ball throws in that House needs to sign those forms for basketball night.
Get your photos on.
That was annoying ad.
Due to the urgency of the operation and the urging of Director Daniels, the combined terms were met, and the team was released. Dr. Sokolsky and Razumkal were picked up for a high-speed flight to Site-01 the same day. During the flight, Sokolsky asks him how he's feeling, and remarks that it seems he doesn't treat his people very well. He replies that he's not sure that's fair coming from him, and he can honestly say that Agent S, or SCP-239, or Miss Steffensdotter's time at MC&D was pleasant for all involved parties. Sokolsky asks why she betrayed him then, to which he just says that no one likes to live in a cage forever, even a gilded one with many entertaining distractions. He sighs and says that it certainly did introduce some unwelcome wrinkles to his itinerary and pocketbook, though. Sokolsky feels that he needs to interrogate him a bit here, as he was in possession of an SCP object that they had registered as neutralized. Razumkal replies that they never intended for the Foundation to find out otherwise. Her powers were more than sufficient to occlude her identity when they met, as he was assured of beforehand, and although he was nervous about including her, she seemed very eager, and he didn't like to disappoint her. She'd been through so much disappointment because of the Foundation. He then goes into her story again, saying that they held an 8-year-old girl hostage, although Sokolsky retorts that she was an 8-year-old girl with reality-bending powers indistinguishable from magic, who could bend grown adults to her will with a flick of her mental wrist. Razumkal then says that they authorized Dr. Clef to murder her, which Sokolsky objects to, as they use euphemisms for things they're ashamed of around here. When Clef Failed, having already stolen her liberty, the Foundation stole her experience of life and time itself, putting her in a coma. Sokolsky counters by saying that it was a different, crappier world, and these days they'd just contrive something clever. There was an explosion in her cell around 2013, apparently the result of a computer virus at Site-19 combined with technician fault combined with something else, which was supposed to have obliterated her. He realizes now that the House of Stars heisted her from them and faked her death, although Razum Kal says that he can't tell if he's only pretending to just now realize this. Sokolsky says that he assumes Razum Kal contracted them to do this, but the demon just replies that MC&D takes no responsibility for hostile actions against its clients, and obviously, they would never take any action harming the SCP Foundation in this way. The House of Stars acquired this asset of their own volition, and having no means of removing her chemical constraints, sought a client who could, which was them. He conducted somatic negotiations with her, and she agreed to be placed under a contractual gias to serve the interests of MC&D in return for being restored to consciousness. Sokolsky wonders why she didn't just reality bend her way out of the coma after being told what's up, but Razum Kal just says that in the realm of fantasy, we are both all-powerful and utterly powerless. He doesn't know how she avoided the Gias with her actions, and he's upset about it as he wanted her here with them, at the end. Sokolsky just says to not jinx them though, as it's not over until it's over. Upon their arrival at Site-01, at the precise moment their credentials were confirmed by MTF Alpha-1, Sokolsky and Razum Kal were met by Dr. Sumerian, who was in possession of SCP-8888. Were then given his debriefing. He begins by wanting to make sure that everyone here is cleared for what he's got to say, with Janus-level clearance, due to temporally sensitive info and bootstrap paradoxes. There is a pause as several individuals leave the chamber, including 058. Sumerian says that most of what they know about the history of 8888 is wrong. After Sokolsky got captured, he was sure that they were about to be caught, and imagined a dozen mages wondering why they were spoiling their game night. He knew that there were measures in place to ensure security would be kept busy, even if Sokolsky wouldn't tell him precisely what those were. But after Sokolsky was captured, he figured the primary plan was shot, so they went to Plan B. He headed back out to the casino tables in the library, and was able to slip out of the underlibrary without anyone noticing thanks to Weddle's distraction. Then the security breach sensor vibrated across the whole library, and he knew that they were running out of time, so he dragged Weddle away from the game he was losing and told him to get safe. He lost track of him in the crowd not too long after that, but it didn't matter as he'd gotten what he came there for. The probability consumer they'd packed into a plastic 8-ball toy was thrumming with energy. He could feel his hair all standing on end as it was interacting with him, exactly as they'd hoped. He wasn't just going to dodge a tree branch this time, he was going to complete the entire heist on his own. He has to admit that it was an ingenious contingency, though he'd appreciate it if that information never reached Sokolsky's ears. He asked the ball a simple question: where is the target? And it gave him back an answer that is not possible on the standard toy. Follow your instincts. After that, it was bedlam on the casino floor, as the reversal of fortunes was not pretty. Under Vegas, security already thought that everyone was cheating, and now the players thought the library was cheating them by stealing their luck. He took an alternate route into the underlibrary in the chaos, using Hishikaku's card as he'd been instructed to. 8 doors and 6 hallways later, he was in the adjunct pipe distribution section of the underlibrary. The place was pitch black, and he was navigating literally on instinct. It wasn't long before he saw it, a temporal tear in the middle of a stone wall big enough for a man to pass through, with just a bit of flickering light. 057 interrupts the story to ask if Sumerian's anomalous luck allowed him to find this alternate target using a magic 8-ball. Sumerian confirms that's the case, although it was a particularly magic 8-ball. He could see the aperture to the other side, and lying there on the ground just
big.
past the threshold was the target. So he did what any reasonable man would do in the situation and jumped through. 054 asks why he didn't just immediately return through the aperture once he had the anomaly. Sumerian replies that at first it was because he saw 2 library mages running full tilt at the temporal rift, but before he could even weigh his options, the tear closed and he was back in the dark. He had no idea where he was, so he started exploring as much as he could. It seemed like he'd ended up exactly in the same place, inside the library, at least from the size of the room and the material of the walls and floor, but there weren't any pipes. He kept exploring until he found his way out, and he popped out into an open and musty-smelling library, but the smell of smoke overpowered that pretty much immediately. 059 remarks on Sumerian mentioning bootstrap paradoxes, and asks if he traveled back in time to 1993. Sumerian replies that he didn't come out of the anomaly in 1993, or in the current iteration of the library. They'll recall that the Underlibrary is a composite of famous and important repositories of knowledge throughout history. The Wanderers grabbed those sections at various points in time prior to their destruction, in order to prevent the irreversible loss of knowledge. This was why a temporal tear was present in that location, though he had no idea at the time why anyone would place the 8-ball on the other side of one of those tears. Eventually he figured out where he was, and when. 48 BCE, Alexandria, Egypt. An alert then sounds on the desk of each of the overseers still present, and 054 says that they're going to have to pause this. They ask Sumerian who he left the anomaly with. Sumerian replies that he left it at the anomaly intake department in Sector G, but 054 says that Sector G just had an unauthorized teleport, and they can't find the object. During Sumerian's interview, a cascade DDoS attack was performed on the servers of both Site-01 and its compensatory backups at Site-15 by an anomalous electronic agent with forged network credentials. Despite a heavy presence of MTF Alpha-1 on site, security patrols were apparently circumvented to allow multiple hostile individuals free access to Sector G during the interval before control was reasserted. Intake personnel were quickly swamped by a vast herd of chickens with elongated legs and vast pillowed undersides coated in a soporific fluid which rapidly induced unconsciousness.
Yeah.
The magic 8-ball Sumerian had utilized in his successful recovery of 8888 was removed from containment by an intruder, who was apparently able to manifest the same tychokinetic powers Sumerian himself possesses, and employed it to locate 8888. The intruders then acquired the object and demanifested from its chamber, leaving behind only a black felt top hat and a single yellow carnation. Sokolsky immediately began a debriefing of the demon Hrazam Kal. Hrazam Kal says that he's sure Sokolsky has already figured it out, and asks if he needs to hear it from him. Sokolsky says that Agent S was able to let the house heist her from MC&D because she intended to offer them the house's services, stealing the 8-ball from Site-01. Hrazam Kal claps in response and says that the original plan was for her to accompany Sokolsky and him here and perform the service. Her counter-offer fulfilled the same criteria, so he accepted. Sokolsky guesses that the house's payment was releasing her from the Gias, and Hrazam Kal confirms that that is what he told them to ask him for. Sokolsky fixes him with a sour expression for several seconds before asking if she's free then. The demon replies that she has her agency and is already exercising it. He suggests that they strengthen security measures across the board. Sokolsky just remarks that she did all this to join the House of Stars, and asks if Hrazam Kal defaulted on a contract just to do something nice for his pet reality bender. He replies that they defaulted on nothing, as they had a pre-existing contract which took precedence, and he assures Sokolsky that the terms they outlined will be honored in due course. Sokolsky just says that he'll excuse him if he doesn't stand around taking his word on that. He then adds that this was beneath Razum Kal, but he expected this, and has had an MTF waiting at his facility for the last 24 hours. Razum Kal says that he didn't think Sokolsky knew about that, but Sokolsky is then contacted by the MTF, who tell him that they're at the vault. It was already open though, and there's nothing in it. Sokolsky, however, insists that it's in there. It just might be thaumaturgically masked, or under a nanite stealth cloak, or it might be floating in half space. Razum Kal, however, tells him that he's afraid that it isn't in there. Sokolsky replies that he literally cannot have it anywhere else. That vault was constructed to the specs required to keep the 8-ball inside, and it's the only such vault he has. The Foundation scried and found that vault, and didn't find any others, not from any other group of interest either. It's not in transit because nothing that can transit it could hold it this long. He stands and begins to shout. He yells that unless they blew it up, or stuck it in an Eigen machine and let it ascend to Godhead, or it joined the House of Stars to go on a heist rampage through time and space, he put that ball in that vault and he's going to get it back. He then stops, as if realizing something, and sits down again, asking the agent if they got that. Razum Kal apologizes, saying that he should have told him sooner, as he didn't know he'd get angry. Sokolsky replies that he didn't know he could, but asks the demon where he's socked it away, or he guesses they'll kill them all or something, as he's written plans. The demon leans over and pats him on the shoulder, saying that he's sure he has. Sokolsky repeats his question, asking where it's contained. Razum Kal simply replies with, "It isn't," and then pauses, asking if he heard that. Sokolsky replies that of course he heard that, but what does that mean? Semantically, it would have to mean it isn't contained, but that's obviously not what he said. And then he realizes what Razum Kal said before about a pre-existing contract. He realizes that he doesn't mean the House of Stars, and comes to a further realization. He asks the demon to confirm that he just sold it, or asked it to find lost Spanish gold, or something else stupid, but Razum Kal says no, and smiles. He told him at the start that Marshall, Carter, and Dark always honor their commitments, as it's the only way to do business. After a pause, Sokolsky just says, "Well played," but he wasn't talking to the demon. After further debriefing, Sumerian resumed his investigation of Hishikaku, now possessed of a catastrophically damning wealth of cross-observed historical data and personal experiences to draw upon. Hishikaku was subsequently found guilty of a number of serious offenses, including, but by no means limited to, forging an Overseer-level access keycard to augment his own credentials, unauthorized use of SCP-2140 for that purpose, occupying the Overseer-only penthouse visitation suite at Site-15, abusing his authority over the course of his directorship to improve said suite's amenities to a degree Sumerian has characterized as obscene and transcendent of the bounds of good taste, engaging with an underground crime ring operating in the Wanderer's library, accepting a bribe in return for assisting a time-traveling Sumerian to steal 8888 from Site-15, although Sumerian has successfully argued that his actions were carried out to preserve the proper course of history. Various acts of petty sabotage attempted against the team during Operation Pickpocket, each easily thwarted by the team, with special emphasis on the foresight of Sokolsky, and cheating in a game of chance played against Professor Crow in the staff commons of Residence Wing B at Site-15. He has accordingly been removed from his post with prejudice, and the matter of his final disposition is before the Overseer Council at present. Researcher Harkness's proposals that Hishikaku be demoted to the rank of Technician 3rd Class and employed as technical support for either Observation Site 211 or the Planet Fitness outpost in North Palm Beach, Florida, are reportedly under serious consideration. Site-666's exclusion from Etra's disastrous intervention in Casino Night allowed Director House to retain much of the goodwill previously generated between its three planning parties, and it further transpired that he had taken out a speculative insurance policy with Goldbaker Rhines on the event's gaming machines and paraphernalia, which paid off 2-to-1 against his initial investment, unchallenged by the insurer due to his near-total non-complicity in the damage. He successfully argued with the Department of Financial Esoterica that his hosting obligations for the upcoming basketball night event justified the expenditure of these funds on expansion of Site-666's plant and equipment. As one element of the complex renegotiations between the Foundation, the Wanderer's Library, Under Vegas, and MC&D, the Serpent's Hand provided a copy of a previously uncatalogued document to Etra. It apparently manifested on a shelf in the non-fiction section, where it was discovered by docents engaged in the ongoing cleanup efforts after Casino Night. The document appears to be a film script, the contents of which have been used to populate this temporary file ahead of its recompilation by 052. The script takes a variety of perspectives ranging from personal to impersonal to omniscient, and ends with a single piece of painted storyboard art depicting the events of its final scene. Due to the accuracy of the preceding narrative, recovery agents were dispatched to the supposed filming location post-haste, but no sign of the subject was found, save for a small impact crater. The document is entitled Empty Pockets: The Unconditionally, Infallibly, Comprehensively True Story of SCP-8888. It is attributed to SCP-8888 itself. At a beach on the island of Antikythera in Greece, we're given the final scene of the story. The shot opens on a vibrant sky as a serene Mediterranean sunset fills the upper half of the frame, with crystal blue sea below. Atmosphere blurs the air above the horizon, rendering the distant mountain ranges faint silhouettes. The outline of an albatross is barely visible, beating its amber-lit wings against the mist, soaring into obscurity. The camera pans down while remaining focused on the horizon, and the sun appears to rise slightly higher into the sky. Eventually, a dark, matte black sphere comes into frame, etched with ornate sigils, and a large amber arrow. The ball is surrounded by the cracked fragments of a gold, truncated octahedral frame. A thin fuchsia umbrella towers over the relic, shading it and a nearby beach chair. A porthole's upper edge is barely visible on the sphere's far side, pointed into the reddening sunset. A woman in a gaudy witch's dress holding a large, outdated brick cell phone on a silver platter approaches the sphere and pats it affectionately before pointing to the phone and saying, "It's for you." The voice on the other end belongs to Jin Larry Viridian, manager of the SCP Foundation's account with the Goldbaker Rhines Insurance Group. He says that he's sorry to interrupt its fun in the sun, but they thought it best to put a bow on everything ASAP. He's sure that it understands, and Miss Stephansdotter kindly volunteered to bring it this token of their esteem. The witch, beaming fit to challenge the sun, places a briefcase in the sand beside the sphere's impact crater. She opens it, revealing it to be packed full of physically transmogrified silver Numa coin. Viridian continues, saying that obviously it understands that this is merely a gift, and in no way should it be taken as compensation for its role in raising the insurance premiums they levy on one of their primary clients.
What?
None of them at Goldbaker Rhines are ever eager to shortchange a client. The witch examines the driftwood table that sits within arm's reach of the sphere, though, of course, it lacks arms. A modest array of trophies is already present. A beautiful crystal bottle in the form of an hourglass, a weathered holographic ace of diamonds playing card, and a small cup of miniature parasol umbrellas. The witch scoops up a portion of Numa coin, sufficient to bankroll any number of stochastic schemes, and adds them to the symbolic haul. A low humming sound begins deep in the bowels of the sphere, and the voice on the phone seems to comprehend its import. He says that it's more than welcome, to keep Goldbaker Rhines in mind for all of its future-proof endeavors, and to enjoy the rest of its evening. The sphere seems to contemplate the far horizon, the endlessly complex yet compassible harmony of the spheres which paint the sky and shroud the earth in dark with clockwork precision. The witch snaps her fingers and places a gaudy drink on the table in the last remaining space amongst the spoils. It's a Mai Tai, with citrus fruit slices pierced by an oversized green crazy straw tied into a figure 8. She winks and says that it's on the house, with no need for her to clarify. She places her hand on the sphere again, and the humming changes pitch and rises in volume as they consider the close of the day together. It's not precisely a happy hum, but the only soul present to feel it can feel a tiny kernel of something like satisfied contentment at its uttermost core. All's well that ends well, then, for most parties involved. The story here is a bit tricky to follow, as it's not told in order and involves time travel, which always makes things a little more obtuse. I'm actually going to go ahead and quote one of the authors here, Harry Blank, to better explain what exactly went down between the 8-Ball and Cimmerian. While he's interrupted before he can explain completely, Dr. Cimmerian reveals to the Overseers that he's been engaged in a lengthy series of time-traveling shenanigans to ensure that the events of the heist play out as they should. His magic 8-Ball and luck anomaly led him to a rift in the underlibrary, through which he could see his target, SCP-8888, and he passed through to acquire it. Instead of ending up in an earlier version of the library's vault, as he expected, he instead finds himself in the burning Library of Alexandria in 48 BCE. All libraries are connected to the Wanderer's Library, after all. It's implied at this point that Cimmerian encounters the 8-Ball in its long-past form, where it is being used by the ancient Greeks, and from this point on, he shepherds it through the known series of events that will ensure it ends up in Foundation control. In an earlier segment, written from the 8-Ball's perspective, where it sits on the deck of Hero of Alexandria's ship as it prepares to set sail for a journey that will end in it sinking to the bottom of the sea, a mysterious figure on the dock is seen. This is Cimmerian, ensuring that the ship does sink, so that the device's remains can be recovered and eventually acquired by the Foundation, creating the present-day version of 8-Ball. Further implications suggest that Cimmerian continues to travel through time. Hundreds of years later, he is one of the figures who steals the 8-Ball from Site-15, thus triggering Sokolsky's heist, which itself triggers Cimmerian's voyage into the past in the first place, creating a time loop. Yep. With the 8-Ball in his possession again, and presumably with access to its advice, he makes further trips through time to ensure that it's present wherever it needs to be for the time loop to be stable. It's possible he even uses it to lure himself through the time rift in the first place, though the article doesn't state this outright. However the sequence plays out, it ends with him presenting the Overseers with the version of SCP-8888 that disappeared from the Wanderer's library vault long before Sokolsky's heist opened it, at which point he believes the heist is finally complete. To summarize that summary then, Cimmerian had to go through time multiple times to ensure that no paradoxes occurred with the 8-Ball, as the Foundation created the 8-Ball from the 8-Ball itself after it was sent back in time and ended up in the ocean. Part of this involved him being one of the individuals that stole the 8-Ball from the Foundation at the start, but his plan sort of ends with him bringing the 8-Ball back to the Foundation. What he wasn't aware of, however, was that the 8-Ball had a plan of its own, to actually escape from containment and finally be free. The 8-Ball had orchestrated the entire thing, including its capture and release by the House of Stars at the end, allowing it to just spend some time on a beach for a bit with Agent S. This is what Sokolsky and Razumkal are referring to in their last conversation, as part of the 8-Ball's plan involved having a contract with MC&D in order to have the House of Stars steal it from the Foundation.
Seen that going?
It's certainly a complicated plot, but in the end, both the 8-Ball and Agent S are finally free from being told what to do by people and organizations.
Mm-hmm.
We of course get to know all this because the 8-Ball went ahead and wrote an omniscient film script of the whole thing, which we know to be 100% true, as it can't write fiction, since fiction is lying. It's hard to say how much this will all affect the Foundation, since they seemed to depend on it quite heavily, but now I guess it's a bit more of a level playing field. Overall, I'd say the individuals, or objects, that won in the end probably deserved their victory, just like any good heist movie.
Yeah, something that smart. Man, so, something so smart figured out how to escape. That's fun. I was wondering if it was like sentient or not. Well, sounds like it was. If anyone watches this and wants to figure out the where to watch it at, it's a YouTube channel called the Exploring Series. He does like a bunch of SCP stuff and Warhammer and just a bunch of fun stuff. Like I've listened to him for years. He does audiobooks. Like that's where I found a bunch of the HP Lovecraft stuff. Like what was it? The Mountains of Madness, and I don't know if he ever did Call of Cthulhu. But then there was one like story that his friend wrote that he audiobooked, and I enjoyed it. It was a neat little change up. Um, yeah. Let's see, SCP, Warhammer, video games, um, Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, audiobooks. Where are they? Let's see, Call of Cthulhu, the Festival, Hunter of the Dark. The one that, oof, boy, the one that got me was Cats and Dogs by H.P. Lovecraft. He does not censor anything. I was not prepared for that. Oh, all right. The book that the audiobook I like is Spring City Terror of 1903 by Sean Mitchell Malone. It's like 5 hours, and like I enjoyed it. It was nice. Ooh, yeah. Shell over Innsmouth is also good. Um, that was a fun one. You got that Innsmouth look, you know? And like I said, recently he's been getting back into Warhammer, which I'm real like stoked for, considering look at what I'm freaking building. A 9-foot tall Death Guard. Let's see. And he uploads like every Monday. So ooh, yeah. I see one arachnid.
Here's
Spiders.
a simple and powerful way to kickstart your business on Amazon. The Helium-10 Chrome extension.
Arachnid SCPs.
Yeah.
There are certain things known as
Bugs.
primal fears, or primordial fears, that, while not quite universal, are extremely common amongst most people. Fears such as fear of the dark, of heights, fire, snakes, and death, things that are deeply ingrained into the human psyche over the past 2 million years. Fears of things that were very clear representations of danger and death, and thus antithetical to the continued survival of the human species. Spiders are another one of these primal fears, and arachnophobia is quite common, even being seen among non-human primates. The concept,
That's
however
concerning.
irrational it may be in modern times, of such a small creature being theoretically capable of killing you, even though it's extremely rare, is still terrifying for many. Combine that with their often unsettling appearance due to size and number of legs, and it's no surprise that spiders are a common sight in horror media. Let's take a look at a handful of SCP articles featuring arachnids in some form, from the touching to the utterly horrific. First up, we have SCP-1470, a male fringed jumping spider recovered from Queensland, Australia, which has the unique ability of communicating telepathically. 1470 is sapient, capable of communicating with other sapient beings up to 9 meters away, but does not possess any other notable differences from other fringed jumping spiders.
Huh.
The Queensland population of these types of spiders has already been observed to be more intelligent than other spiders in their ability to solve problems and employ unique hunting tactics to capture their prey, which mostly consists of other spiders. Due to 1470's anomalous ability to communicate, though, it's not recommended that any conclusions about the rest of its species be drawn based on conversations with 1470. 1470's communication seems to assign terms on a best fit basis within the minds receiving the words, with terms it uses for its own body parts sometimes being adjusted automatically to make sense for human anatomy. After an unsuccessful attempt to introduce 1470 to a mate, it communicated the following statement to researchers. I went at the bloody harlot, waving me arms around to let her know what's what, but she wasn't having none of it. She smacked her lips at me and gave me a good drumming with her arms and legs, and I know it was because of that hideous red stripe you asked to put on me arse. It really makes a fellow stand out in ways he's not supposed to, you know? Those savages might not notice it much, but you can't fool a proper lady. So anyway, I had to tie a bungee and make a jump for it, before sailing back to me tent to nurse me pride. Many of the terms used were simply automatically translated to make sense to a human listener. Afterwards, the red stripe that was put on the spider to help identify it was removed, and a less mature female spider was introduced into its terrarium. When a researcher came by to inquire, 1470 told him to not be so loud, as he'll wake the little Sheila. It says that she was pretty scared when she got tossed out here by those big predators, but he's not completely sure, as she can't talk like they can talk. None of them ever can, but she cares in her own way. She asked him back to her place, and they're going to stay there until she's ready. The researcher asks it, ready for what? To which it says that it can't be a gentleman if they talk about it so plainly, not like humans do. It guesses that it should say thank you, as it's not what it wanted, but it will do. The researcher replies that it told him it wanted a mate, to which 1470 says that it said it wanted a wife, as a mate is a friend, like they are. Mates are fun to talk to, but it wanted someone it could look in the eyes while it talked to them. The researcher tells it that they have never found anyone else that can talk like it does, and 1470 says that that's what separates them from the savages, the other spiders. It would never eat something that can talk, and although the female can't talk, it can tell that she's like it, and she just needs to grow up some. That will be very soon, and they'll have good children, if that big old harlot keeps her distance. The researcher replies that they removed her from the area, and it says that it hopes they didn't hurt her. The female reached maturity within the next 2 weeks, and 1470 left the web after copulating. As is normal for the species, the female did not devour or kill 1470. Sometime later, 1470 calls out to the researcher, who says that they were just doing some work on its enclosure. It says that it doesn't see him inside of the enclosure, to which the researcher says that he's outside of it. The spider responds that it doesn't have an outside, and how come it can't get outside? The researcher asks it if it sees his arm waving, and the response he gets from the spider is unintelligible, with wordless dread being the most apt description of what he felt. Its species has excellent vision, but at a very short range, and it apparently never realized that what it was speaking to was so big, asking how anything could be so big. It refuses to communicate then for 2 hours, as the researcher tries to coax it into conversation again. Eventually, it apologizes and says that it thought he was another spider, but wanted to stay hidden because it's kind of the king of the jungle around here, or so it thought. It asks what he is, and the researcher replies that he doesn't have any answers that will make sense to it, and he's been scared as well by things that are as big to him as he is to it. 1470 says that the children won't talk to him, but the ones that lived are doing all right, although that probably isn't important to someone like him though. The researcher tells him that it will be his job to watch them, and they're hoping they can talk like it can. The spider also hopes for that, but says that it's pretty tired and itchy now, and wants to change its coat, but it can't. It apologizes again and says that it was nice to talk to someone while it lasted. 1470 lived for a total of 3 months in Foundation custody before perishing of natural causes, and so far there's been no evidence that its children can communicate telepathically. Definitely a bit of a sad article, but that's the way of things. Next, we have SCP-1006, a collection of intelligent spiders that have achieved sapience through unknown means, and have established a rudimentary system of government resembling Marxist communism. The original mass of spiders was discovered by a hiking couple, who alerted park authorities. After the discovery of written propaganda inside of the central web, along with evidence of usage of extremely simple tools, webs resembling faces of passers-by, and simple attempts to block off the area via fallen branches, the Foundation intervened. The colony is currently located in a cluster of black oak trees, within a massive and complex central web and several secondary webs, all of which appear to be very well maintained, with damage being constantly repaired. The surrounding area has a nauseating odor due to the presence of thousands of dead insects, dead spiders, and an occasional dead bird or small animal. Some members of the spider community maintain the web, while others are apparently chosen to maintain the agenda of the whole. Once supplied a source of black ink and poster sheets, the community will communicate with humans by creating signs written in English. These signs are largely centered around demands for the dismantling of Western imperialism, a scathing critique of the bourgeoisie, and a request for less mosquito spraying in the surrounding area of the park. The head of the colony is a large spider resembling a wolf spider, taking up refuge in the largest tree of the cluster. This entity views the outside world as something that belonged to them, and is merely being maintained by the bourgeois humanoids, and it has given its name as Benevolent Leader. Close studies have discovered that the members of the colony utilize a central collective think tank that passes on the ideas of the Benevolent Leader to the others through complex frequencies in the web. The skeletal remains of a male human were found in an area of the web, surrounded by dead insects and a variety of small, shiny objects, such as bottle caps and pebbles, along with the occasional pocket watch and bits of metal in apparent reverence. The colony does not allow this skeleton to be disturbed, but passive analysis indicates that the individual died decades prior from blunt trauma to the back of the head. Identification located near the body identifies him as a known political radical, reported missing from a nearby town in 1976.
That makes sense.
So, obviously, this one is a play on arachno-communism, itself a parody of anarcho-communism. So far, we've looked at some pretty peaceful and relatively nice spiders, but let's get into some of the more horrific stuff.
Spiders.
SCP-3023 is a phenomenon in which an object will abruptly develop an arachnoid form and gain motility in the presence of humans. This phenomenon has so far only occurred in a well-defined region of central Germany and occurs on an irregular basis, with an average of 2 months between occurrences. The entities will behave erratically, generally moving around their vicinity at random and using their legs and pincers to attack anything they come into contact with. They display speed, durability, and physical strength far in excess of what their structure and composition should allow, but destruction or dismemberment of the object is sufficient to cause the anomalous properties to cease. We're provided an abridged list of entities, starting with a baseball that ripped apart to produce 8 pointed legs surrounding a central mass. Reportedly, it animated mid-pitch, and upon impact with the catcher's mitt, it attacked the catcher. After killing them, it remained on the field for 84 minutes before being destroyed by civilians. Another was a metal folding chair, in which its legs and other tubular segments functioned as spider legs, with the seat and back operating as a central mass. It animated in an abandoned office building in the presence of several urban explorers, who managed to capture a brief amount of footage of it killing 2 of the explorers. Later, a telephone animated, although no living witnesses could provide a description of the anomaly, and an MTF destroyed it remotely via explosives after 4 hours and 2 Foundation casualties. We'll get some more details about this one a little later.
What?
The smallest recorded instance of 3023 was a gelatin capsule containing ibuprofen, which simply developed an arachnoid shape while maintaining structural integrity. It managed to kill a single individual while animated, with evidence suggesting that it animated while inside of their throat, exiting through their spinal cord. The largest instance thus far was an animated Mercedes-Benz SUV, with the front and rear of the vehicle forming into a distinct cephalothorax and abdomen respectively, with limbs formed from deformed auto parts. It became animate while traveling at 72 kilometers per hour, and was shown capable of maintaining this speed after transformation. The vehicle's occupants are believed to have died during the transformation, and the resultant automobile accidents led to 41 casualties.
How?
It was ultimately destroyed via airstrike when it became apparent that the MTF sent lacked the ability to properly contain it.
How did
Lastly, a
kill
human
somebody?
corpse found on the side of a road by police suddenly animated, with its skeletal system being radically reorganized, allowing 4 additional limbs made of bone to emerge from its abdomen. This resulted in 6 casualties, until a civilian was able to temporarily disable it by running it over with an ambulance. The corpse had not been identified prior to animation, no match for the recovered genetic material was found, and no cause of death was readily apparent. Security footage from the day prior to that transformed telephone's activation showed an individual breaking a window to enter the office in which it was located. When he had acquired the telephone, his jaw distended and then split open horizontally as 4 dark, tongue-like appendages extended from his mouth and proceeded to rub the telephone for 36 seconds. After closing his mouth, the individual returned the phone to its location and exited the premises.
Spider-Man.
Forensic evidence has conclusively identified the man as a local restaurateur, but he has denied any memory of the event or knowledge of his observed properties, and thorough examination of his body has failed to identify any anatomical abnormalities. There's no evidence that he has been in contact with any other instance of transformed objects, and he has displayed no anomalous properties since his detainment. Certainly a bit of a classic SCP, with no explanation of why these things are happening or why they're happening in this local region specifically.
It just is.
SCP-940 is a parasitoid organism with some superficial similarities to certain spiders. Adult specimens are highly agile and possess
Probably
leg
Rotac.
spans from 4 to 7 meters, or 13 to 23 feet. Although due to the difficulty in separating 940 from their hosts, their average weight and body size are unimportant. Each of their 8 translucent legs is dotted regularly with 6 types of specialized sensory organs, including 2 of indeterminate function, and they end in large tarsal claws, allowing them to climb sheer vertical surfaces with ease. They also possess a radial nerve net, similar to the common starfish, and no central nervous system. It's possible that 940 rely on their host's brain power for processing of external stimuli. Infection from 940 occurs following exposure to body fluids containing their eggs and larvae, and we're provided a chart showcasing their life cycle. After initial exposure, eggs and larvae begin to reproduce throughout the host's blood. The larvae are the only stage of 940's life cycle with many of the organ systems necessary for survival prior to integration with a host. Once the first larvae hatch, they will begin cannibalizing any unhatched eggs, and then each other, in order to ensure that only one larva develops into an adult. There have been cases of as many as 5 larvae reaching maturity within a
Creepy.
single host, although this is rare.
Yeah.
Hosts at this stage will often complain of abdominal and chest pains,
Testing.
and treatment with intravenous anti-parasitic compound is possible if administered before this point. The remaining 940 larvae will then migrate to the chest cavity, typically attaching to a major artery, the heart, or spinal cord. It will position itself with its legs oriented towards the host's back, and its internal organ systems will begin atrophying. Their carapace will then break down, although their legs remain intact.
I got food.
Their circulatory system will conjoin with that of the host, along with its nervous system to a lesser extent. The larva begins producing a number of enzymes which cause the host's body to increase production of a number of hormones, including human growth hormone. The earlier abdominal and chest pains subside, but the host instead starts to experience an increase in appetite and general listlessness. Approximately 3 weeks after initial infection, 940 begins to alter serotonin and dopamine levels in the host's brain, causing them to experience feelings of happiness and well-being. The legs of the larva, now supplied blood and nutrients by the host, begin to penetrate the host's skin on their back. Hosts typically do not report any discomfort or alarm at this stage, and rarely seek treatment. Around 5 weeks after initial infection, the 940 specimen reaches full size and maturity, although hosts remain secretive about their condition. A form of communication is believed to occur between the specimen and its host, such as hosts displaying a vague awareness of things occurring behind them. The specimen will often retract their legs, folding them flat against the host's back and allowing them to be easily concealed by clothing. Additionally, the specimen triggers an increase in the levels of testosterone in the host's body, leading to increased libido, and since infection with other hosts is facilitated through bodily fluids, this is usually accomplished via coitus. All infected individuals that survive 6 weeks of infection are considered to be in stage 7, where they report the loss of a sense of individuality, gradual clouding of the eyes leading to near total blindness, and bouts of catatonia and catalepsy. Death is typically due to an aneurysm caused by skyrocketing blood pressure, heart or kidney failure, or exsanguination. Infected individuals at this stage can be identified by the strange choking sound they make as they attempt to draw in more oxygen than is possible. When the host dies, 940 will continue to animate the corpse using its limbs, entering a berserk state in which it will attempt to reproduce and infect with no regard for concealment, generally inflicting physical violence and blood transmission to do so. This state can last from 1 to 3 days before the specimen expires. Stage 6 and above specimens, when not attempting to conceal their identities, are extremely agile and capable predators, and through the use of their powerful limbs and multiple sensory organs, they are highly adept at evading capture. Field agents are to be highly cautious and equipped with protective gear at all times to prevent infection, and issued nerve gas grenades for suppression purposes. An incident occurred when an assistant researcher failed to return a live sample to cold storage, allowing it to remain unattended in the lab for 45 minutes while on lunch break. The resulting breach of containment resulted in 7 infections amongst research and security personnel, and another 5 in D-Class personnel. The affected wing of Area 14 was isolated for decontamination, and the Foundation personnel were administered intravenous anti-parasitic compound and fully recovered, but the D-Class were isolated for observation and research. 3 of the subjects formed the basis for the infection's life cycle as documented, while one of them had multiple larvae reach maturity. They were terminated 3 weeks into the process, when the accelerated symptoms resulted in her progression to Stage 7, completely bypassing Stages 5 and 6. Another D-Class was initially believed to be uninfected, displaying no symptoms, but a full examination found her to be pregnant, with the unborn fetus being infected.
Oh.
The fetus was allowed to mature, with the D-Class being kept unaware of its condition. Both expired, however, when the legs of the specimen penetrated the D-Class's uterus, and the fetus is now kept in cryogenic storage for study. Certainly one of the more horrific SCPs we've read about. Finally, let's end with SCP-5683, which begins with a message from 057 to a Dr. Christensen, congratulating him on his success with the Doomsday Project. They are still looking for an appropriate candidate for Director of Site-04, and his name has come up, but the Council still wants him to prove himself a little more before they make their final decision. They want him to solve the 5683 problem. SCP-5683 is a large arachnid organism capable of rapid regeneration and bodily modification. It is extremely hostile to all human life, and will constantly attempt to breach containment in order to engage in mass slaughter, usually by injecting venom using its mandibles and impaling victims with its legs. Although it has demonstrated the capability for basic reasoning and planning when hunting prey, it is not believed to possess human-level intelligence. When placed into a threatening situation, it will quickly adapt in order to become more resistant to whatever form of danger is being posed to it, and these adaptations will persist until the danger is no longer present. Due to frequent containment breaches and the increasing drain on Foundation resources, a termination order was issued, with it being overseen by Dr. Christensen. The initial deliberations begin, with Christensen in high spirits, and he asks the team that's been working with 5683 if there's anything he should know about it. The team hesitates, until one researcher says that it's smarter than it looks, and if it spots a way to escape, it'll take it in an instant. Christensen sighs and says that he expected more, but for now they're going to do some basic stress tests, starting on some tissue samples before moving on to the creature itself. There's no point getting complicated if they can just kill it with fire. They test high-temperature incineration on the sample first, which destroys it successfully, but when testing it on the creature, it thrashes and screeches for 30 seconds before developing armor plating covered with an unknown substance that prevents combustion. In another meeting, a junior researcher, Silva, says that the test went as expected, unfortunately, to which Christensen says that he hopes they didn't think he seriously believed it would work. It was just to establish a baseline. He's contacted the O5 Council and requested the use of some anomalous substances to aid with termination. Not anomalous enough to qualify for containment, but anomalous enough to help them out here. Silva asks about the specific substances for logging purposes, and Christensen says it's Y220, Y835, and Y436.
All right.
He expects each would be enough to do the job, but it's best to hedge the bets. He remarks that this spider doesn't compare to the lizard, causing Silva to smile and ask when he worked with the lizard. Christensen loses a bit of his enthusiasm and says that it was a few years back and they had a containment breach. It wasn't pleasant, and he moves on, telling Silva to get the info logged. The other researchers in the room remark on the fantastic work. Y220 is tested on a sample, converting it to glass before it violently explodes, but when tested on the creature, only 80% of its body converts to glass before exploding. Within 30 seconds, the creature had fully regenerated. With Y835, the sample split into two independent organisms, which then proceeded to kill each other through mutual injection of venom. Despite this seeming like a really terrible idea, they used the substance on the creature itself, causing it to split into two entities, which then injected each other with venom. One died near instantly, but the other adapted an immunity to the venom and survived, proceeding to consume the other to regain lost mass.
Oh no.
With Y436, the sample was reduced to a fine mist upon exposure, and the creature itself was also reduced to a fine mist, but all of the lights in the facility turned off. When they reactivated 3 seconds later, the creature had fully regenerated. In another meeting, Christensen kicks his chair in anger, losing all of the high spirits he came in with originally. He yells that the file says the creature adapts, but coming back to life when the lights turn out is not an adaptation, it's just magic BS. Silva tries to get him to calm down, which he eventually does, and says that he's requisitioning Y910. The other researchers ask if he's sure about it, to which Christensen says that he is, because if the GOC can use it to poison gods, surely it can take care of one giant spider. He's also ditching the tissue sample test, because the O5s are choosing the director of Site-04 soon, and he's not going to sit around wasting time. He'll take full responsibility for the decision, should anything go wrong, which Silva seems very pleased to hear, and Christensen tells the others to start preparations, walking out of the room as the sound of laughter is heard. The log for the Y910 test simply says, energizing response, and containment breach in progress.
Great.
Christensen and Silva run into the secure bunker as Christensen seals the door behind them. He repeats that this isn't happening before smelling something and complaining about the stench, something that has been mentioned multiple times now and has been blamed on an accident in the cafeteria. Silva says that the creature must have gotten to the reactor, and it's all his fault. Christensen stands and yells, asking him what he did, to which he says that it's his job to oppose actions that he believes are ill-advised, and he didn't do that for Christensen. Christensen says yes, and asks if he knows how many people have died because he couldn't do his job, because he refused to. Silva starts crying and apologizes again, saying that he's the one who wanted to use Y910 and wouldn't listen. Christensen pauses and asks if he's trying to make him his scapegoat, which Silva denies, but says that there are procedures for a reason. Christensen tells him that when they get out of here, he's going to tell the council the truth about what happened here and what Silva has done. Silva says, however, that he doesn't think that will be possible, as this chamber isn't nearly strong enough to survive the reactor overloading. He says that he shouldn't have led them here, which Christensen agrees with, but then says that with due respect, he must admit some personal responsibility. Christensen turns to him and starts screaming for him to shut up about whose fault this is, as a loud banging sound is heard against the bunker door. It bursts open, revealing SCP-5683, and Silva stands in front of it, telling Christensen to run. Christensen pushes Silva towards the giant spider and prepares to run, but the spider disappears, and Silva turns to him. He remarks on how disappointing this is, and the other researchers enter the room. Christensen asks what happened to 5683, to which Silva says that there's little reason in keeping a dummy around once it's served its purpose, as a substitute. Christensen is obviously extremely confused, and Silva says that he mentioned working with a lizard, and there was a containment breach, but asks him how he escaped that situation, as it seemed quite lethal. Christensen pauses and asks where he is, to which the other researchers tell him not to ask questions that he knows the answer to. He asks them who they are, and Silva says that they are the jury, his jury, and he's afraid that Christensen has disgraced himself quite horribly once again. Christensen asks how long he's been here, to which Silva says a considerable amount of time, and then he asks how much longer he'll be here. Silva tells him that he'll be here until he takes responsibility. Christensen moves into the corner of the room, shaking, and says that this is his fault, but the researchers remark that he says it, but he doesn't mean it. Christensen begs and apologizes before running towards the door. Before he can reach it, however, a black iron chain appears and wraps itself around his throat, pulling him out the door and around the corner at extremely high speeds. It proceeds to drag him out of the complex, slamming him into walls as he yells that it's not his fault. The floor and walls drop away, revealing what is behind them. There is a great deal of blood and fire and suffering, along with a terrible stench. There is laughter, and Christensen begins screaming, never really stopping. The article ends with another message from 057 to Dr. Christensen, identical to the first one, except the number at the bottom has increased by 1 to 22,122,593. So, Christensen is obviously in some form of hell, clearly for his actions during a containment breach involving SCP-682, the lizard, that presumably got a number of people killed. He's not being eternally punished for getting some people killed, however. He's being punished for not taking responsibility. His punishment is now a perpetual loop of a very similar anomaly, a spider instead of a lizard, and his memory is wiped each time, with the hope that one day he'll realize the error of his ways and take responsibility. It does seem that the entities involved actually want him to do so, as Silva was notably happy when Christensen said earlier that he would take responsibility if anything went wrong, and then disappointed when he didn't. How exactly the Foundation has transcripts of all this is unknown, as is the nature of this hell, but there's a thought that the Three Moons Initiative might be involved, as they are often responsible for rewarding and punishing the deceased in their afterlife. For some people, there's not much in life more terrifying and unsettling than a spider, even if they know that in reality, any given spider might pose absolutely no threat to them. Including spiders in a piece of horror fiction is therefore a pretty easy way to ramp up the tension for many people, and there are certainly plenty of people that will refuse to even watch this video due to the subject matter. It's no surprise that there's quite a few articles on the SCP Wiki containing spiders. And while horrific articles like SCP-940 are the type of thing you'd expect to find, it's nice to see that there's others that are more strange or even heartwarming. It's probably not much comfort to the average arachnophobe, though, that, at least in real life, spiders can't nest inside of you and sprout their legs out of your back.
Spider-Man. Oof. That one, yeah, that one was gory. But also, how did a single ibuprofen get through your spine? Like, do they become super tough? They have to, right? Alright, I'm gonna do one last short one and then I'm ending the stream post.
Pizza-based spaghetti is back at Fazoli's. It's only $5.99. Spaghetti.
Get some files to save correctly.
Armaments of the Necron. The Necron were the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, existing millions and millions of years prior to the Imperium of mankind. Their technology was great enough that they could blink across the cosmos, devour entire systems with generated black holes, and snuff out stars with the press of a button. They were great enough to overthrow the Old Ones, and managed to shatter the godlike Catan into shards, which they then captured and harnessed. Of course, this wasn't without a cost, and they decided to go into a great sleep rather than take on the up-and-coming Eldar, waiting for a time when they could reclaim their mantle as the greatest force in the galaxy. Recently, that time has seemed to occur, as the Necron have been awakening, still possessing much of their ancient technology. Let's take a look at their weapons of war that they are now using against the unsuspecting factions of the 41st millennium.
41st millennium.
Let's start by taking a look at close quarters weaponry, a category that is largely reserved for the more elite troops within a Necron army. Crazed and twisted Necron warriors known as Flayed Ones exclusively fight in close quarters, but their weapons are razor claws that extend from their fingertips. Similarly, the Necron Wraith is a serpentine entity that floats through the battlefield, phasing in and out of existence before striking with bladed fingers. The standard Necron warrior does possess a form of bayonet or axe on their Gauss rifles, but the killing potential of these pales in comparison to firing the rifle itself. Higher-ranking troops, including Lich Guards, Lords, and Overlords, will often bring a variety of extremely deadly melee weapons into battle, however. The War Scythe is one of the most potent, created from the same living metal that makes up the Necron's bodies, and bearing an entropic field generator, which allows it to carve through practically any material in existence. These weapons are also nearly impossible to destroy, surviving direct hits from las cannons, even if their wielder does not. Similarly, Necrons possess a number of different hyperphase weapons, including the Hyperphase Sword, Harvester, and Reap Blade. These weapons all vibrate across dimensions, allowing them to completely phase through enemy armor, striking at the flesh beneath directly. The most numerous close-quarters threat in the Necron army are the Canoptic Scarabs, small metal creatures resembling insects that are capable of consuming nearly any material in existence and converting it into energy. The Necrons then use this energy to fabricate the rest of their technology and equipment. Scarabs typically function in large swarms as mindless feeding machines, rushing over everything in sight and consuming it piece by piece. Given enough time, a swarm of scarabs can easily consume an entire hive city and everyone in it, using the energy consumed to massively supplement the Necron's army. Individually, they pose relatively little threat, but they are almost never encountered alone, and thousands of scarabs can quickly swarm over a tank or fortification and burrow their way in, turning it swiftly into a tomb. Necrons also possess a number of larger constructs that are even more devastating in close quarters, including the Canoptic Spiders, the Tomb Stalkers, and the Tomb Sentinels.
More spiders.
These entities are easily able to single-handedly rip apart enemy tanks and fortifications with horrific speed. Moving on to ranged weaponry,
Excuse
the
me.
Necrons possess a form of technology that no other faction does, that being Gauss weaponry. Gauss technology functions by firing directed energy at a target, which proceeds to shear apart the atomic bonds between molecules. Regardless of the target then, organic or inorganic, and no matter what it's constructed from, the Gauss weapon will tear it apart, magnetically drawing the constituent atoms towards the weapon. Against armor and fortifications, this causes a certain amount of it to simply be disintegrated, but against flesh and bone, it causes a flaying effect, stripping away each layer of skin and muscle until nothing remains.
Yeah.
If the Gauss energy hits a relatively minor location on a body, the damage will still be catastrophic, but potentially livable, while anything close to a major organ will almost certainly result in a swift, agonizing death. The Adeptus Mechanicus has spent a good deal of time attempting to replicate Gauss weaponry, as it's certainly the most potent form of arms on the battlefield at this point, but they've yet to come close. As far as they understand it, the Necrons' weaponry should be a mathematical impossibility due to the massive amount of energy involved, contained in such a small form, that should by all accounts simply rip the weapon and wielder apart upon being fired. The most basic form of Gauss weapon is the Gauss Flayer, wielded by every single Necron warrior, and just as capable as any other Gauss weapon of tearing apart flesh and armor in equal measure. While these weapons are of course extremely devastating, especially in mass, they are not unstoppable. Primarily, the effect of disintegrating armor is not instantaneous, and sufficient amounts of armor plating can take longer to chew through, requiring multiple shots. Against an unprepared and under-armored opposing force, however, a group of Necron warriors armed with their most basic weapons can truly be horrific. Gauss blasters are the next step up, being heavier and possessing 2 barrels instead of 1, allowing for even more powerful bursts of energy, swiftly able to tear through infantry and light vehicles. These are the common weapons of the Necron Immortals, the elite soldiers of the Necron armies. Gauss cannons are even larger, possessing 4 barrels, capable of ripping through a Space Marine's armor quickly and easily. These are the typical weapons of Necron destroyers, crazed soldiers that take to continually augment their physical forms to make themselves more devastating on the battlefield. Going even further, a heavy Gauss cannon goes back to only having 1 barrel, sacrificing rapid firing rate for greater power. These are akin to Imperial las cannons in size, wielded by Necron heavy destroyers, and are capable of ripping apart even the heaviest of battle tanks. Somewhat similar are Gauss flux arcs, consisting of 3 Gauss flares linked together and featuring a single barrel, generally mounted onto the sides of Necron monoliths. These weapons are used either defensively, to vaporize any would-be attackers approaching the monolith, or offensively, scouring the area of life while moving into enemy lines. Even larger Gauss weapons, including the Gauss Annihilator and Obliterator, are capable of vaporizing their way through Titan armor with ease, or ripping apart entire squads of heavily armored Space Marines. Another category of weapons that certain Necrons will utilize are particle weapons, which function by emitting a stream of antimatter particles, detonating on contact with normal matter. Known for being extremely reliable and requiring far less energy than the Gauss weapons, the simplest of these is the Particle Caster, a pistol-sized weapon used by Triarch Praetorians and Canoptic Wraiths. Particle Beamers are the rifle-sized versions, Particle Shredders are the heavy anti-tank versions, and Particle Whips are much larger, in the form of a glowing power matrix crystal located on the tops of monoliths. When fired, the whip will unleash devastating arcs of antimatter lightning, splitting the air with a cracking sound and vaporizing tanks and infantry alike in a large area around the monolith. Some Necron starships have also been fitted with extremely large versions of the particle whips for ship-to-ship combat. There are also Tesla weapons, which utilize arcs of lightning that jump from foe to foe, charring them with
Neat.
immense heat and growing more powerful with each arc. Versions of Tesla weapons range from the rifle-sized carbines to the large-scale destructors. Other interesting weapons include the Tachyon Arrow, a wrist-mounted device that transmutes a sliver of metal into an unstoppable bolt, capable of near-infinite range and of penetrating practically any substance, including going straight through Imperial Titans. The Necron's Deathmark snipers utilize synaptic disintegrators, which fire compressed leptonic beams of subatomic particles capable of utterly destroying neural and synaptic tissue, leaving their victims mindless husks. The transdimensional beamer and exile cannon function by banishing materials to a pocket dimension outside of the normal time-space continuum, whether it be unwanted debris or an unfortunate opponent. Potentially the most powerful weapon the Necrons possess is the Celestial Orrery, a device that projects a representation of the entire galaxy. Not just an impressive display, however, the orrery is somehow linked to the galaxy, to a degree that if one of the stars on the device is snuffed out, the actual star will go supernova. While this degree of power is unparalleled amongst any of the other factions, doing so upsets the fundamental forces of creation, setting off a catastrophic chain reaction that's only fixed with thousands of years of constant micromanagement afterwards. Largely, then, the orrery is used as a surveillance device, allowing the Necrons to observe the entire galaxy and all of the events taking place within it, although the Oriskar dynasty that watches over the device use it sparingly, mostly forced to protect it from others that would use it without care. Moving on to discussing the various vehicles and constructs the Necrons possess, their standard attack crafts are called Tomb Blades. These were originally designed as void fighters, but since the Necrons' robotic bodies aren't affected by the vacuum of space, the canopies were stripped away for a more open design. Tomb Blades are capable of operating both in space and in atmosphere, where they hover across the battlefield, zipping around in corkscrew motions to avoid enemy fire. No normal pilot could ever hope to handle the motions of a Tomb Blade, but again, the Necrons aren't bothered, and since the average Necron warrior wouldn't make for a great pilot, the movements are actually controlled by a series of hyperfractal equations. The result is an extremely unpredictable, fast, and dangerous vehicle, especially in large numbers, each armed with twin-linked Tesla carbines or Gauss blasters. Moving up in size, the Annihilation Barge is a light anti-personnel skimmer equipped with a twin-linked Tesla destructor, capable of unleashing devastating arcs of lightning across enemy infantry. The Annihilation Barge's drawback is its low speed, so these are often kept in defensive positions to put a stop to any infantry assaults. A similar design is the Catacomb Command Barge, armed with a Tesla cannon, which is primarily used by Necron Lords and Overlords as their personal transport across the battlefield. The standard troop transport vehicle for the rest of the army is the Ghost Ark, capable of carrying up to 10 troops, as well as possessing the means to repair Necron soldiers, even if they're too damaged to repair themselves. Those that are too damaged for even the Ghost Arks to repair are of course broken down into raw energy to be reused elsewhere. Since the Ghost Arks are also capable of void flight, they serve as boarding craft and landing shuttles as well, and are armed with 2 Gauss flare arrays for support. The Necron's heavy assault vehicle is of similar design to the Ghost Ark, known as the Doomsday Ark, but it sacrifices the carrying capacity for a single massive Doomsday cannon. The cannon is among the most powerful weapons the Necrons possess, capable of destroying pretty much anything instantly outside of perhaps a Titan. The Necron Monolith is perhaps the most important and most useful of the vehicles possessed by the Necron, since not only does its Gauss flux arc projectors and particle whip allow it to easily clear the surrounding area of hostiles, the portals located in the middle of the monoliths are key to Necrons overwhelming a battlefield. These portals are captured wormholes that are linked to Necron tomb worlds and warships, allowing Necron soldiers to instantaneously arrive onto a battlefield en masse. In a very short period of time, a number of monoliths can arrive at a battle, and hordes of Necrons can sweep out, each armed with the greatest weaponry known to the galaxy. The Doomsday monolith is an even more dangerous version, armed with a Gauss obliterator, and the Megalith is an even more massive mobile fortress capable of holding multiple monoliths inside of it. The obelisks are similar in design to monoliths, but are designed to suddenly emerge in the presence of enemy aircraft, blasting them out of the sky with Tesla spheres, or simply pulling them down with gravitic pulses. Weapon emplacements include the Necron Pylon, capable of emerging from the ground to attack trespassers and armed with particle accelerators, Gauss flux arcs, or Gauss annihilators. For aircraft, they have some fighters, the Doom Scythe and Night Scythe, the latter of which also functions as a troop delivery mechanism thanks to its integrated wormhole, and is armed with twin-linked Tesla destructors. The Doom Scythe eschews the wormhole for a death ray, and is piloted by an integrated android brain capable of simulating billions of possible strategies in the span of a few nanoseconds. The Night Shroud is the Necron bomber aircraft, which drops death spheres across a battlefield, a relic from the days of the war in heaven containing a fragment of antimatter. Their void ships include various light cruisers, armed with arrays of lightning arc turrets and particle whip batteries, while their largest vessels are known as Karn-class tomb ships, although there don't appear to be many of these in existence. The tomb ships are more than strong enough to take out an Imperial battleship, armed with lightning arcs, particle whips, energy drain generators, and a weapon known as the Sepulchre, capable of generating a psychic wave against an enemy ship that drives its crew to madness. In addition to all these, the Necrons also possess a number of unmanned constructs, including the aforementioned Scarabs, Tombstalkers, and Tomb Sentinels. Canoptic Doomstalkers are large automated walkers armed with a large Doomsday blaster, as well as twin Gauss flares for anything that gets too close. Canoptic Reanimators, on the other hand, are support machines capable of emitting nano scarabs across the battlefield to repair damaged Necron soldiers and constructs, as well as tear apart any unfortunate enemies in the area. Similarly, Canoptic Spiders can quickly repair any damage to the Necron army, as well as controlling a small army of Scarabs, and are often used to patrol Necron tombs for any intruders. Also found in tombs are Wraiths, large serpentine constructs armed with a dimensional destabilization matrix which allows it to skip in and out of reality. While this was originally designed to allow it to reach into solid machinery for repairs, it's just as capable of using it to phase its claws and tendrils into flesh, phasing them back in to sever arteries and other vital organs.
Oof.
All of this isn't even going into the Catan, of which the Necrons possess certain shards of their former selves, able to be unleashed onto a battlefield.
Oh boy.
Although these shards are just a mere fragment of the power that the Catan used to possess, it's still enough to devastate an entire battlefield, potentially including the Necrons. Catan shards can generate antimatter, disintegrate armor and flesh alike, disrupt gravity and matter, and erase foes from space and time. These, of course, are used sparingly by the Necrons, and are contained in Tesseract vaults until unleashed, but they're among the most potent forces the Necrons possess.
I'm trying to get this to fit.
Possessing the most potent technology in the galaxy, with much of it completely beyond the Imperium's grasp of understanding, it's a bit of a wonder that the Necrons haven't reclaimed their place yet as the reigning power. By all accounts, they very well might at some point in the relative near future, But their main issue right now is their numbers. Although there are trillions of Necrons, each one as dangerous as the last, the grand majority of them are still asleep on their tomb worlds, and many of the awake ones are not united in force. Of course, narratively, no faction will ever win in Warhammer 40k, just like Superman will never stay dead. But the Necrons certainly put up an impressive showing when just looking at their weaponry. Getting hit with an Imperial lasgun or flamer is probably pretty rough, but it's hard to compete with something that atomically flays you layer by layer.
Oof. Yeah, that sounds painful. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. Yeah, slow stream. I'm still waiting on that piece for 3D Builder to repair it, and then I'll save it, print it, put the Titan together, and show y'all the Titan. And this is my arm pieces for my what's the word? Death Guard cosplay. So hopefully the arms work. Let's hope so. Thank y'all for joining me today. Not gaming. Yeah. Audiobook, live stream, putting together 3D models. Oh yeah, and a time traveling SCP theft heist, which was fun. Yay! I can see someone animating it. It'll be fun to watch. I'm not gonna be the one doing that. I'm too lazy. Thank you for joining me. See you all.